Hello, and welcome back to the Awakening Philosophy podcast. My name is Jed, and we are together on a quest to discover what exactly philosophy is. Welcome to those who've joined me in the chat. We are here. Oh, a lot of people here today. Which reminds me, I want to take some time before we start to thank everybody who was here last time. We had a lot of lively discussion. We had people coming into philosophy from a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different perspectives, a lot of different opinions. Of course, that's part of the game of being human, but we were able to come together in a really fun and interesting way through questions. We discovered that if we are able to take our perspectives, our opinions, the level of understanding we're on, frame them as a question, it helps open ourselves up to new discovery, and it invites others to share in our level of understanding that we're at ourselves. So instead of saying, I think this is the case, which is, of course, how we're taught. This isn't an attack of any kind. We're taught to be confident, be certain, give the right answers on the tests. That's what gives you the good grades and gets you punished if you're not right. All through our society, if you're not doing the right thing, you are often in our society, we're not encouraged to reflect on ourselves and see it as a gift, as a learning opportunity, a gem, an opportunity to reflect on ourselves and learn something new about ourselves, our quest to know ourselves, but also the other quest we're on as human beings, our quest to discover the cause of our false beliefs. We wouldn't be here if we didn't have both. That doesn't usually happen in society. Usually the cops come along and look to catch you being wrong, and then they don't care about learning or reflection. They just punish you. Same with teachers, same with your boss, and so on. But our community is different, because we are joining the human race. Why do we say that? Because humans are Homo sapiens. The word Homo sapien means man the thinker. We are becoming rational. Why? The simple use of rationality will lead us to these conclusions. That we are here for a reason, we come from somewhere, and therefore we weren't able to maintain our existence in those higher realms. Therefore, we must be carrying a false belief about ourselves, or the nature of reality, or the nature of the good. And in the process of being born into a human form, we forget the things that we did know. So we're also not just on a quest to remove our ignorance, uncover first, and remove our ignorance, but to remember that which we know in the highest aspects of our own, the highest aspects of our own mind. So that's the two elements of the human quest. Socrates has been calling it purification and perfection. We've also been looking at it as escaping the chains of fate, the false belief, the primary cause that keeps us chained to the inevitable train tracks, leading to the same inevitable disasters, failures in anything we pursue that's meaningful and good. The more meaningful the task, the more likely it is to trigger our problems. Not just in our activity, but in our states of mind, bringing us that same feeling again. Oh, I feel this way again. And we talked about that being a self-fulfilling prophecy. There are false belief of yourself that diminishes yourself in a certain kind of way, either diminishes your ability to ask questions and learn, diminishes the understanding of your own state of consciousness. I'm not as good as God, or I'm fundamentally bad. And of course, diminishes your self-goals, the ultimate goal of which is to know thyself. So that those are ways of fundamentally putting yourself down that every human being, no matter what, learns, manifests in this way, keeps us chained to this inevitable cycle of failures. Of course, in the chat last time, somebody pointed out it's easier to see in other people than it is in yourself, which is absolutely right. But fortunately, we're developing a group of like-minded adventurers, because this philosophical quest is the human quest. It's the archetype or the paradigm of the true hero's journey. And we can support ourselves to see, hey, if we miss the mark, that is a gift. Socrates had this attitude all through his life. I would rather be shown to be wrong than be right about something. Because if I'm right, then I'm already there. I would rather find out what I am wrong about, what I'm missing the mark on, so I can reflect and learn something new. So with a community like that, we can see when we miss the mark as a gift. And also, if we can phrase where we're at or where we're stuck in the form of a question, it invites people to share it with us. So we can share where we're at in the form of a question. If it's just a statement, somebody either already agrees with it and they're going to say, yeah, I know. Or they don't and they're going to dismiss it. This is the problem with opinions and belief. If you go into a pub and say, I like the Broncos, I like the Red Hawks, they're either going to say, well, I like the Red Hawks too. Fine. That's the end of that conversation. Or I disagree with you and I'm going to stop talking with you. Doesn't really go anywhere. But human beings can ask questions, which can invite each other in, but also helps us because it puts us into a curious state of mind, of wonder, of curiosity. And the more meaningful the question, either about our problem, because you've seen how significant your goals are and you really, really want to figure this out. I'm sick of always feeling this way when I talk to a girl I like. I'm sick of always feeling this way when I have to get up on stage and perform. I'm sick of always feeling this way when I pay for my groceries. I don't like this. And I really, really want to figure this out. The more you see of the stakes and the implications, the more of a dialectic you've done, seeing the implications that follow from the problem, the more you become focused on the question, the more significance the question becomes to you. Equally so, in the higher, the more we see the importance of the questions that we have about the soul, ourself, reality, why we're here, where we're going, the more we see of the significance of that, or this one, the more we're able to naturally focus on our question. That focus is essential. And if it's a question, not only do we have focus, singular focus, unified focus, but we have an open-minded curiosity. Also, part of having a question is wanting to understand it. So we have the focus, we have the focus of ourself, we have the open state of mind, and we have the desire to perfect and use our logos or understanding. If it's a real question that you really, really want to solve, you're not going to settle for an opinion. You're not going to settle for somebody else's belief or even advice, because that falls in the same category. It's either good advice, you already kind of think that way, or it's bad advice and you ignore it. But understanding is different. Understanding is you yourself solving your own problems and leveling up your own understanding in the process. And we've been talking about how we can see those three aspects: the focus of ourself, single-minded and unified, the open state of mind, and our understanding as the three highest excellences of being a self, of being a human being. We have a self. That's the big mystery, of course. That's our ultimate destiny, to know that. And there are a lot of puzzles associated with that, especially in the Parmenides, which we're going to be going back to. The self, number one, know thyself, and our state of mind. All the different states of mind, from negative feelings to bored feelings to lonely feelings to happy feelings to insightful feelings to profound insights, to the more profound insights about the nature of reality, to the kind of waking up or remembering the ultimate nature of self and reality, which we can call enlightenment, and what Socrates in the text is calling learning, to that which is beyond even experience, which is a real puzzle. All of those are states of mind. And being a human, we have states of mind. We feel as well as we think. So, the self, your focus, your attention. What are you doing with your attention? The second part, your state of mind. Can you maintain a sense of curiosity and wonder? Having a question helps. And of course, the third part of the self, the logos, our understanding, the highest use of our intellectual capacities. These are the three aspects of the self. And fascinatingly enough, the negative self-talk, the inner critic, the false belief of the self, stems from an attack on all three of those or any one of those three. You're not good enough, so don't focus on your own self goals. be a Cinderella, help other people. It's better to help other people than focus on yourself. Sacrifice yourself for king and country. Your mind, you're not genuine. Oh, you have original sin. You're innately bad. Have guilt or feel bad about your own nature. It's an attack on the self-mind. And of course, you can't think for yourself. You can't understand the mind of God. You can't understand these questions. You can't understand the most important things. You can't understand what happens when you die. Nobody can know. That's why we all allow all sorts of crazy beliefs. Hundreds of cults out there telling you what happens, but you can't think. Of course, in philosophy, we're discovering that this is fundamentally false through our own understanding and our verification, because we not only discover the cause of these false beliefs, we play it out in our lives, we get back into philosophy, we pursue our highest goals, we see if it works, we see if we're freed from that counterattack. Just as the more we understand in philosophy, the higher it takes us up that ladder of our own state of mind, ultimately to the one self. And that's the promise of the Phaedo. And so the way that we do that is by sharing our insights with each other, sharing our difficulties, helping each other reflect, using the dialectic, question and answers to encourage reflection about on yourself. That's ousia, reflecting on ourselves. And of course, not only does it help others to ask questions and encourage answers, and encourage honest answers using the self-logos as much as your understanding is, as far along as your understanding of the logos is. Use the highest understanding and apply it to your highest vision of yourself. Encourage that, so that will help others, but also it's helping yourself, because first of all, you're learning the dialectic, which is the development of your understanding, and it's what, according to Socrates and the Phaedo, it's what opens you up to those higher states of mind. It's also a kind of yoga that can separate you from your physical senses, out of the body, to directly experience those things that you're studying, which is amazing.
Wow.
But also it puts you in a state of mind by having it as a question where you are focused, you're open to new information, you're open to thinking in a new way, and you're really eager to understand. So it really encourages you to use all three of those aspects of the self. So I want to thank everybody who was here yesterday, because, a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds, but by framing our problems or our questions or our opinions as questions, it really opened it all up for everyone to share in. And that's one of the great things about philosophy, and one of the reasons why we're interested in awakening philosophy for ourselves and the world. Everyone shares in it. Everyone shares. It's not, you either like the Broncos or you don't. It's the Broncos against the Dolphins and we hate each other and yay, rival. No, everyone can. Because everyone has curiosity. Everyone can use their understanding. Therefore, everyone has the potential to open the gates to the highest levels of reality. Wow. And can verify their understanding for themselves in those higher experiences. And this is one of the reasons why Socrates calls philosophy the only true mystical tradition. Many are the people who carry a staff and act like they're mystical. Many spiritual people who wear the robes, right? But true philosophy is the true mystical practice, so long as you're doing it properly. And that's what we're wondering about. How do we do philosophy properly? And what benefit do we get from doing it? So that's where we're at. And Socrates has laid down a doctrine for philosophy. And then after he did that, in the text in the Phaedo that we're reading, which we're using to gather Apollo, we're doing Apollo, which is what? Gathering the self-logos terms, learning about the self-logos, learning about it from someone who's obviously mastered the logos and the dialectic and has reached those highest levels and has come back, Socrates, to help us out. But also that with Apollo, we have to be Aphrodite. Apply it to our own questions, apply it to our own lives, make it real for ourselves. Just raise questions, see how much we can apply what we're learning to our questions. And of course, that's Aphrodite and Apollo. And That culminates in Hermes, the dialectic. So as we do that, we have our own documents open in our favorite word program, and every time we learn something new about a self-term that we're interested in, could be self-beauty, what is beauty itself? Could be self-justice, could be self-truth, what is the ultimate truth? Whatever one of those self-terms, which is one of those aspects of pure being, metaphysical, before the physical, then we put it into our document, we take notes, and then we have enough notes, we organize it according to the dialectic, which sharpens our own thinking, prepares us for the insights, and allows us to use it with other people. And that's where we're at in the text. Socrates is using his dialectic to help somebody else. He outlined what philosophy was, the art and practice of dying. That's crazy.
Wow.
But his friends is like, Socrates, that would mean the soul has to be immortal. And a lot of people don't think that. And then Socrates used his dialectic to demonstrate an argument. It's not an opinion or a belief, but an argument. An if hypothesis. If this is the case, then this would follow. And then this would follow, and then a conclusion. And his friends had to come to a conclusion for themselves. Yes, that was sufficient. I am able to change my mind. I didn't think the soul was immortal, but now I do. Thank you. He gave 3 big ones. That we know nature is a back and forth of opposites. We see a coming to be dead and a being alive. Therefore, we need a coming to be alive and a being dead to exist. Otherwise, nature is impotent, lame. Can't do the opposite for that one. It has to be circular, because otherwise, if we start alive and we end up dead and we don't go back around again, everyone would end up dead at the end of it. And he calls that the Enderman argument, because Enderman is a zombie. He's always asleep. Everyone would end up asleep. And of course, we have to come to be alive from a place of being dead, because if our souls come from the physical world, we'd run out of resources, because resources in the physical world are finite. And then his friend CB's jumped in and said, hang on a second, I've got another argument to show us that our soul has to be immortal. It's the idea of learning. We've seen Socrates say, hey, look, you don't understand anything, this particular idea, right? You don't know Pythagoras' theorem, do you? No? Well, I'm going to ask you some questions. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but by asking you questions in a careful, good way, I'm going to draw it out of you to show you that you knew this at some level and you had the logos of it, the way of understanding it. CB said, I've seen you do it a bunch of times, so that's another argument. We wouldn't be able to do this. We wouldn't be able to have a dialectic. We wouldn't be able to learn if we didn't know it already. What, are you going to turn somebody's head upside down and pour, or sideways, and pour into their ear all this information that they don't know? Kind of like how we think of learning at school? Of course not. Why is it that we recognize beauty straight away? You've never seen beauty itself. You've never seen 2 sticks actually equal, but you know the idea of equal somehow. So this was the theory of learning. Cebes gave his demonstration showing something about him. He must have benefited from being around Socrates. Simmias jumps in and says, I'm not really familiar. I'm not with you. Now, a lot of people in our world would say, that's because you suck. And we would laugh at them. And we would all point. And maybe a few hundred years ago, we would even throw rocks because they're not sharing our opinion. We looked at why we have that in our history, right? The kind of way of thinking that we're all different, and things outside of the cave that we evolved in. Early human history was scary, especially before we developed the logos, our ability to think well. So outside the cave, bad. Inside the cave, good. And always do what the cave leader says. So this is one of the earlier causes for our problems. But we wouldn't treat him like that. What do? We ask the big 2 questions we always ask as a philosopher. The only 2 questions you can really ask. Where you at? Where you stuck? That's all. Where you at on the logos? What's your highest understanding so far? And what's your highest vision? Of course, you can communicate that by turning both of them together, mixing them together like a recipe and forming a question. Where you at? Well, I have a question about this highest vision that I've had, or this highest idea that I've had. And my question involves this level of understanding that I'm getting from the logos. That's where I'm at. And of course, that's where the conversation can start. That's good coffee talk. The other question that you can ask a human being is where you're stuck. Have you noticed a problem in your life? Not a problem like, oh, I forgot to put gas in the tank this morning and I got late for work. A kind of problem that is repeating. That kind of problem. Because if it's repeating, it has a cause. And if it's repeating, you can notice a pattern from the particulars. Socrates has been talking about, so back to the story. Simmias is like, hey, I'm not with you. And of course, we don't laugh at him or make him feel bad. We don't call him a sinner because he happens to be missing the mark. By the way, the word sin that we take to mean as you're innately bad, which is an attack on the self, of course. So it would be a cause of a problem if you believe them, if they said it. Actually is from a Greek word, amartia, which means to miss the mark. It's an archery term, which is fascinating. If you are an archer and you have a target far away, someone closer to the target sees whether you missed the mark and they hold up a flag to say whether you hit or you missed the mark. If you missed the mark, you don't feel bad about not being perfect. You adjust your aim. So amartia means to miss the mark. Of course, in domination authority structures where the people at the top try to present the image that they're better, that they're more knowing, that they deserve all the wealth and the money and the women's and all the control. The king is a king of England because he's closer to God. That's literally what gives him the title, which is of course made up nonsense. In those structures, those domination authority structures, they want people below them to feel bad about themselves, to accept their lot in life. Yeah, I deserve less. Why? Because I'm bad. But hang on a second. You're just a baby who was born. Why is that baby who was born rich and you're not? Oh, because I'm a sinner. That's right. You're a bad sinner. Go to confession and confess your sins. I grew up Catholic, and of course that was a ridiculous fast they made us go through. Sit in a room with the priest and tell him how bad you are. That's freaking terrible. It's a child abuse, really. But it's also a mistranslation of the fundamental word. So when we're reading the text, we have the Greek and we can look at it. We can nail it down. We're not going to be manipulated by translators and their pathologos, their problem. Or our society that says, hey, don't read the text. For like 1,000 years, you couldn't even have a Bible. You have to just believe what the authorities tell you. That's faith. That's being a good Christian. Of course, we know that's a scam. We wouldn't allow that today. If someone said, oh, I've got a secret book from God and only I can read it, we would laugh at them. We would make a South Park episode about how ridiculous that is. So in reading the text, the word is not sin, it is missing the mark. So if we recognize that, then we can recognize, hey, it's not bad to miss the mark. It's important to not only miss the mark, but realize you have friends with whom you can reflect on that missing the mark. Because if you notice particulars, you can notice a pattern. So in the text we're reading, Simmias is like, I'm not with you. We didn't sentence him to suffer in hell. We said, oh, okay. Socrates asked the two questions, where you at and where you're stuck. Now let's talk. And he said, I'm stuck at the level of, I'm not really familiar with this logos of learning. As I'm not as familiar as my buddy Cebes is. And so Socrates broke it down for him. And by the way, during that breakdown, which was the use of the dialectic, he used a structure in his thinking. He started with a definition. He went on to the demonstration. Whenever the other person wasn't in agreement, take a step back and you break it down. He started with a definition. This is what I want to define. This was my hypothesis. You with me? Yes. Here is a quick demonstration. That might have been enough. For Simi's, it wasn't. So what happens if the demonstration isn't enough? Division. Divide it up step by step. And every step, your friend comes along with you. We both grow. The questioner grows because he gets more clarity on his understanding by asking questions. And his friend grows because he's learning something new. It's win-win. And then he points out, hey, when you're looking at two sticks that are equal, you might show your friend the same two sticks and he might say, no, they're not really equal. Well, you're both using the word equal, even though it's unlike equality itself to him, and it's kind of like it to you. So, but if you talked about equal itself, you couldn't disagree. Your friend wouldn't go, no, equality is sometimes unequal. No, by definition, it's equal. So what is it about these two sticks that triggered the same memory of equality that you've never seen with your physical senses? We could do the same for anything. Beauty. You've seen a beautiful person, you've seen a beautiful sunset. Ever seen beauty itself? By the way, you say, oh, do you think that sunset's beautiful to somebody else? No. That's not beautiful. Oh, but you're using the word beautiful even though it wasn't in the sunset. Where did you get the idea from? So therefore, we must have known beauty before we've got into the physical world because we never see it with our senses. But Socrates went on to say, by the way, let's not stop there. You also need to learn this. So he's functioning like a doctor. This is also going to be helpful to you. All things seek self-beauty or self-equal. Even sticks seek it. But by being physical, they're always going to be in need, so long as they're physical. You never see the ideal in the physical world, but everything seeks it. So everything that you'll ever see is the same in that way. Not only that, they're the same in a second way. Their job is to remind you. Because Socrates said you will only get self-realization by recognizing the ideas, the self-terms from the physical. If there wasn't something physical that would remind you, oh, that referee made a bad decision. Why do I really get triggered? Why do I get mad? Why do I throw my popcorn onto the court? Because it wasn't just. Have you ever seen a completely just referee? What is justice anyway? Because you can apply it to a referee, you can apply it to a judge, you can apply it to a lawyer, you can even say, hey, a parent is being unjust when he spanks his children. So what is this idea of justice that can be put onto or can be reminded of by these physical things? Beauty, justice, equality. It's a whole list. The kinds of ideas we're interested in philosophy. You wouldn't even begin to ask that if you hadn't had some experience of it prior. And of course, because it's not in the physical world, it must have been in a place that exists before you're born. So all things in the physical world have a purpose to point you home to where you were before. And Socrates says, hey, you can go home before they bury you. So he said, hey, I'm going to this place. Just tell my friends, I'm going to the club. Meet me at the club. And like, what? You want them to kill themselves? No. You don't have to do that. Philosophy is the art and practice of death and dying. You practice separating from your senses. In fact, by doing philosophy, you are the least interested in your senses out of everybody. You go down to the pub, they're talking about, women and money and fame and all this sort of stuff. These are all physical things. A philosopher's like, oh, really? Why did you find that Instagram model beautiful? What is beauty? What's the ultimate of beauty? Why do we desire honor? What was the most honorable thing we can do? What is excellence? Who was the best human being? Was it Socrates? This is the least interested in your physical senses. You're not interested in clothes or shoes or being alpha or any of that stuff. Socrates says, hey, yeah, so philosophers are the least interested in the body. So they're the most deserving of death, and they're becoming more like death than anybody else. But they can keep going and actually pull the stunt off. And when you do, you have to get familiar with collecting yourself together. Don't fly around the room. Some people call that being a tourist, a spiritual tourist. If you can separate yourself from the body, what are you going to fly around and visit all these places? Or are you going to collect yourself together, get used to that, and do philosophy? Do the dialectic. Think more clearly without the distractions of your senses. Ask these questions. Well, if I have an existence that's out of my body, why am I here? What's my purpose? And where am I going? Making it a mystical tradition. So, Simius is like, hey, break down this learning thing. Socrates says all physical things seek that, whether they know it or not. So you could say a philosopher is the same as everybody else in that we seek unification with self-good or the ousia, our beingness, our more primary beingness. And that's knowledge, by the way. That's where you know everything. And a philosopher is better at if everything physical seeks self-being and has a job to remind us of self-being, like two sticks or a beautiful sunset, then a philosopher just simply knows the game rules and can play it well. Because philosophy is the method of doing that. How? The dialectic. How do we get there? The dialectic. How do we remind others? The dialectic. Ask them questions about their senses. So we're just people who've learning the rules of the game, which is why we call being a philosopher rational and therefore joining the human race. Philosophers are those in the human race, because if you're in the game but you don't know the rules and you're running around like a headless chicken, you're not really in the race. Socrates is inviting us to join the human race, which is a very different way of living, but also it's what we need to solve problems, not just our own, but the world's problems. Why? Socrates says, well, you're either a lover of learning, philomathesis, and then the more you learn, you realize, actually, I'm a lover of wisdom, because learning is the logos and dialectic, and that always points to being. So having the logos and dialectic, knowing the understanding and the structure of reality, being is reality, that's wisdom. That's what it means to be truly wise. And then in that process, you will realize, hang on a second, I don't want wisdom in a way where I'm going to forget it, where I'm going to be distracted, whether it's just like an imagination of beauty. Sure, we start with that. We learn the logos from the text, and we build up our dialectic and our imagination of what the realm of being must be. But what a philosopher really wants is to get there too. And then that's the initiation experience Socrates has been talking about. That's what makes it a true mystical tradition, because then that virtue, that habit and practice of learning, philomathesis, learning, realizing it's about wisdom, so a habit of learning wisdom, which is the logos applied to being, upgrades to something called self-phronesis. What phronesis is has been a question on our minds for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. But it's a kind of wisdom that doesn't lose its power and is more divine than all of the virtues, but also is innate. So we are hypothesizing, we have an if, and we have a question. That our hypothesis, if that's the case, then maybe it's a kind of learning that we can take with us into our next incarnation, or maybe allowing us to escape the cycles of reincarnation, if it's a kind of wisdom and virtue that doesn't lose its power. Socrates pointed out, hey, philomethesis, philosophia, philosophy, and philophronesis has its shadow, as the virtues do. The shadow of temperance is being temperate with some pleasures so you can be really good at others, right? Mastering your desire for alcohol so you can spend all your money gambling. That's the vices. Wisdom, being clever and being able to plan well and being able to focus and to be able to have hold your vision and making plans for what benefits, but not directing it with the logos to being, but directing it to your physical body and your physical senses and your desire for honor and riches. That's the vice version of wisdom. Every dictator has had some level of clear seeing, some level of clear planning, some level of focus on his vision, only he directs it towards his vices. So that's the nature of this shadow. That's the nature of human problems. It's not a lack of learning. It's not missing the mark. We're not bad because we didn't get it right. No. We're good that we're actually aiming and taking a shot. That's why philosophy is a conversation. It's not to get it right first time. It's a conversation our whole lives. You will always make new insights. While there's an end to knowledge, of course, there is an experience of knowledge. Understanding, you could always build. You can always make new connections. That's the fun part. You can use a new analogy to talk about it. You can make a new myth. You can make a new story or comic book or video game to talk about a new kind of way of connecting it to knowledge, a new mythology. It's a conversation. It rolls. So our problems aren't missing the mark the way we think of it today. Boo. The true cause of human problems is the shadow. We've been talking about how those are two fundamental kinds of relationships in reality. There's the physical movement of hot to cold, and then hot and cold, back and forth, or left and right, or something like that, growing and then decaying. Of course, that as a relationship in the physical world was a necessary argument to show that there has to be reincarnation. Because if everything in the physical world is that back and forth of opposites, then there has to be the opposite of being alive, just like there's the opposite of being awake. There's awake and asleep, and there's falling asleep and waking up. So too, using an analogy, there is a coming back into life as there is dying, and a being dead as there is being alive. But there's another kind of relationship, the second kind of relationship, which is the analogical relationship, needed to evolve up other levels. You don't know what a king is? Well, I'm going to use an analogy. King is a great idea, how to be a true king, but I'm going to use a lesser shadow. I'm going to talk about how a shepherd cares for his sheep, because some things are going to be like and some things are going to be unlike, same and different. I'm going to use that as an analogy to talk about what is the same in ruling people. A shepherd has to care for his sheep, just as a king has to care for his people. That's how we learn. We use what we're familiar with, and we apply the like relationships to the higher level, lesser to greater. Of course, an analogy fundamentally has three aspects. A is to B is to C. Well, analogy actually has four. Shepherd is to sheep, like king is to his people. But you can make an even more fundamental analogy, make it smaller, make it more simple, by making the middle term the same. Parmenides is to Socrates, as teacher to student, as Socrates is to us, teacher to student. Socrates is teaching us right now. So it's a three term. It's four terms, but the middle term is the same. That's called a mean analogy. Lesser is to greater is to a third term. A is to B is to C. This analogical relationship is needed for the unfolding of reality. If there are higher dimensions, higher states of consciousness and being, then somehow the greater unfolds into the lesser. The realm of being unfolds into the world of becoming. But as it's three terms, we have the world of becoming, the world of being, and the world of the self. Because even the realm of being had to be caused by something, which is a big question for philosophy. Which means if we reach the realm of being as philosophers, keep going. Keep asking questions. See if there's anybody around in that realm to ask questions to. Socrates might be there. He says, hey, meet me up there. Okay, so our problems is of that sort. The vices, the shadow. You have some level of temperance to be a really good gambler. You have some level of wisdom to become a tyrant. But it's the shadow. Some things are the same, but the fundamental things are different. The fundamental aspects. That's the nature of human problems. And that's why we've been talking about the meme debate. Would a woman rather meet a bear in the woods alone or a man? They're mostly saying a bear, because a bear is predictable. It's not going to be unjust to you. It's either going to be hungry and try and eat you, or it's not. It's the opposites. That's the physical world. But a man has consciousness, which means he has the potential to become higher from the lesser to the greater, but he could go from greater to lesser. He could have his vices. And of course, countless stories of men kidnapping women and doing terrible things and so on. So that's not a lack of virtue, it's vice. So, using those two relationships, we can recognize the cause of our problems, or the nature of our problems, that our vices are the shadow of the dialectic. Only the key terms are missing. We're not doing logos, and we're not applying it to being. We're not perfecting our understanding or dianoia. We're just settling with faith or opinions or trust. I mean, trust is okay so long as it's trust in the logos at the beginning, but we don't settle for that. And the thing that we thought was beautiful might not have been beautiful. Often we get that imitation of the divine experience of pure beauty when we're young. Our parents seem most beautiful, but they happen to be showing themselves in that way when they act towards us in an unjust way. And we walk away with an unsuspected false belief about ourselves that we're no good. So we want to use the dialectic to reflect on our problems, to find that root cause. So, philosophers are like those who know the rules of the game, the dialectic. And therefore, what's the same thing about all physical worlds? We all seek being, and we all are here to remind ourselves and others. Balloons. Socrates in that argument said, hey, look, we talk about self-justice and self-equal when we're using the stick example. We talked about seeing beauty when we talked about seeing your girlfriend. But let's just shorten it and call it ousia, because all of those different beings have a hyparxis, are all have the same highest point. It's just one thing, being. Actually, we call it ousia, self-ousia. So whatever self-ousia is, we wonder, well, where did that come from? Something to do with the self? Maybe. But that was what Socrates said. Hey, the theory of learning, you must have known it, which means that's that hyparxis of being, self-ousia, which contains fundamentally in it in some way all of the ideas humans use in their discussions. Even if they're at the pub talking about whether or not the ref made a bad call, they're still using justice in their thinking. They might not know the real game, so they might be like on tangents and not really playing the real game, but they're still using it, which means everyone must have had this experience, and you never see justice through your physical senses. So everyone before they're born not only must have existed, but must have existed while knowing knowledge. And Simius is like, yeah, of course, we wouldn't be able to have this conversation if we didn't. But also logos. So whatever is this process of reasoning that we go through, that must be somehow inherent in ousia as well. Otherwise, how could we reason ourselves to that remembering? Socrates doesn't stop there, of course. He goes, by the way, just like there is a hyparxis and a single ousia, which makes sense, of course, because people who have spiritual experience often use the word oneness. I experienced everything as a oneness. Oneness isn't a single one, because a single one wouldn't have qualities. But a oneness, many qualities. It existed. It was eternal. It was myself. I recognized myself. I remembered myself. I knew everything. It was the most beautiful experience. A whole bunch of qualities we call self-er terms. But it's as a oneness. It's all unified in a hyparxis. Yes, apply that argument to the soul. If we all knew that, we must have known it by being the same as it. Which means even though in physical world it appears that we have many different souls, we also had a hyparxis of a singular soul. That was something he threw in for no extra charge. That was kind of nice of him. Just a second. Kind of nice of Socrates to throw that in. Kind of makes sense. If we all knew the same thing, we would have been the same thing. So, if this theory we have of lesser to greater as the cause of our problems is the case too, then just as we start at looking at physical examples, that's the purpose of the physical world, look out for justice, look out for beautiful things. Whatever you're interested in, maybe you're an athlete, look for excellence in the sports you like, or the games you like. I really like when I'm in that excellent state, or I like this gamer when he's in the flow, or I like this athlete when he's like on fire, or I like this beautiful person, or this beautiful art. Look for the physical particulars and then trace them back, unify them from the many to the one, which sounds like the movement of the many ideas to the one self-ousia, or the many souls to the single soul. But also in the shadow, when we have problems, write them down. Share them with your friends if they're in this game too. Why? You will look for many examples of the same problem. And if it's one of those problems that repeat in many different areas, you have what you need to apply your philosophical mind, because you go from the particulars to the one. Is there something the same in all of these particular instances of my problem? Is there a word that comes up in my mind? Do I say a certain kind of a thing? Do I feel a certain way? The state of mind is key. I feel lesser, or I feel anxious, or I feel depressed, or I feel not good enough, or something like that. Maybe not good enough is a thought, a logos. Look for the logos, look for the states of mind. That's your journey down the dialectic to the root cause of your problem. That state of mind. And what do we do in the dialectic? Once we do a dialectic on some idea, we go through it. Definition. What's the soul? How does it function? How does the soul relate to something? Maybe here's a good one. How does the soul relate to self-ousia? Because we can use our material. I encourage, try that one. Make the S term soul, make the O term ousia. Dialectic has two terms, you rub against each other. So how does the soul function towards self-ousia? And then how does that self-ousia, having been affected by the soul, then relate to other things? Other ideas? Self-justice? Self-beauty? Or us? And then finally, us at the end of it, how do we relate back to the soul? But after having gone through that, you have what you need to do a new one. You can start again. You know what? After going through that, not only do I understand the soul better, But when I divided it up in that division stage, definition, demonstration, division, there was one key idea that really stuck out as really cool to me. I gave birth to a new question. Self-beauty. After I saw the many ways that self-ousia, having been affected by the self-soul, relates to lots of different things, it causes beauty in a fascinating way. So I'm going to do a new dialectic on self-beauty. I gained a new insight on self-beauty. So too with our problems. Share with your friends in the community patterns of problems. They'll ask you questions, practicing the dialectic. What's the same? Was there any same logos? Was there any same states of mind? Where you at? I mean, it's a where you stuck question, where you at and where you stuck. But either or, there's the logos and the state of mind. There's a way of thinking about yourself in the world. There's like words that come up, how you function towards other people, and there's a state of mind. That's kind of like, it's from that state of mind that words come up. It's from that state of mind that you might act like a dork when you wanted to be really cool. So the state of mind and the logos. Well, if you recognize the key state of mind from having gone through that dialectic, do another one on that state of mind. Define that state of mind. Demonstrate it. How does it demonstrate in your life right now? Is there anything you're doing that's important that might trigger that state of mind? Hopefully you've got your nose in the Phaedo. So that's probably going to, because of how meaningful that is, as one of the most meaningful things you can do, it's probably going to surface the state of mind. So can you demonstrate it right now? Then divide it up. Can you think of other times, other instances, division step, throughout your past where you've had that state of mind? And then of those divisions, pull out the most significant or the most primary or the most hyparxis. What's the earliest? So the hyparxis, before self-ousia became the many ideas, more first, more primary, metaphysically first, it was just self-ousia. So for your state of mind, the shadow, addressing our problems, what was the first time you had that you can remember having that state of mind? What was the most primary? What was the hyparxis of that self state of mind? Negative, anti-self state of mind, I should say. When was the first time you remembered? Pull that out. So definition, demonstration, division, and from that division, find out a primary or hyparxis or causal or powerful term, bring it back to the start, and what do? A new dialectic. That early scene, define it. What was happening? Who was there? Define the early scene. Demonstration, what was happening? Who said what to who and why? Division, what were they actually doing? How were they actually let's break it down with the logos. They might have seemed to be acting in a good way or a convincing way when they treated you this or that. But what were they actually doing? You'll have a name. You'll have something fundamental about what they're doing that can understand what was actually happening. From the divisions, you've got a key term. Start another dialectic on that. Hey, by the way. And then imagine saying it to the person. Hey, this is what you were doing. This is the definition of what you were doing. This is how it demonstrated. You thought you were being beautiful. It looked beautiful to me when I believed you. But it was a lie. Division. This is how it broke up. This is how it's affected my life. This was the conclusion. And by the way, from the division, I walked away with the conclusion about myself, and it was wrong. So hey, start again. By the way, this was my wrong conclusion, and this is not true. But by the way, where did you get it? What was your definition? Who are you copying? Who are you demonstrating it as? You're dividing it up. You're passing it on the tradition. By the way, if you divide up your functioning, bring in all of the words that you've learned about the self-logos and self-being. The two things we do in philosophy, self-logos and self-being. So all of those understandings and self-er terms. Was it just? Was it beautiful? Was it good? Was it helpful? Was it equal to self-truth? Was it true? Pull them in. Answer them. Because they are occupying a space where true beauty is. So we're purifying ourselves through the dialectic process, which is a fun game we share with our friends, and we encourage. We don't put someone down for being a human and having a problem. That's crazy talk. That's caveman talk. Right? Different from the cave bad. Right? We encourage the questions and we practice our dialectic. Purify our false images of truth, beauty, and our false understanding from that initiation experience. And in doing so, we are practicing the dialectic, which leads us to the true initiation experience and to the true experience of truth. And hopefully, by doing this at all times, by desiring it at all times, temperance, by holding on to this at all times, courage, by using it to as a model for our life, wisdom, and doing it with ourselves and our friends at all times, justice, you have developed the virtues through practice and habit, so that when you do have that experience, you have the logos in your back pocket, you have the habit of applying the logos and the dialectic in your back pocket, you can turn that experience into true virtue. That's phronesis, apparently. There's probably more, but that's the hypothesis we've been building about phronesis. And that's the kind of learning you can take with you to the nightclub, to where Socrates is going. And he says, I'm going to people who have completed their work here. The good men, better men you'll find here who have completed their work, and also good gods up there too. So it might be a kind of, that kind of virtue and practice might be a kind of the ticket. Can be your pass in. Because Socrates says it's the divine self that lets us into the club. Which is a cool quote, so let's pull it up in the text. Here it is. We must purify ourselves from the body until the divine self should liberate us. And having been purified, by having been liberated of the phronesis of the body, we shall be with such a kind as through ourselves we shall know all that is pure. And that is the truth. Likely to be the truth. It's a hypothesis until you get... Oh, you can't see the text. Let me bring up the text. There. Purify ourselves from self until the divine self should liberate us. Liberated from phronesis of the body, we will be with a kind, such a kind as we are, because it's and that's the truth, because we will be pure ourselves, so we will be with that which is pure. Because it's not lawful for that which is not pure to attain that which is pure. This is the doctrine we have to repeat to each other and believe. That's all those who are right, philomathesis, lovers of learning. And of course, right before that, he said we do that from, intuitively knowing, that's the experience of noesis. And we also do that it is through our understanding that we purify ourselves. Self-understanding, the highest understanding. And by understanding each particular self, that's the dialectic. That this person will approach the closest to the noesis, the intuitive knowing of each being. So, that's the benefit of doing what? Putting our thoughts into questions. You can either have questions about particular things that represent truth, or questions about our problems. Questions about things that will lead you to your destiny, which is noesis of the truth. If you've got the logos and the virtues with you in your back pocket, you can upgrade from the truth to the phronesis. Or ask questions about your problems until you can trace it back to the hyparxis of that. What's the root cause, the root false belief, the unsuspected false belief about the truth of the self, rather than the true understanding and experience of the self. So that's the reason why we love questions, and that's what makes us different from other human bods walking around. We're in that game. 2 questions: where you at, where you stuck, and whatever level you're at. Are you at level of particulars? Cool. I'll ask you a question about them leading up. Where you stuck? Oh, all you've done is only recognized 2 problems that you've had in the last year. Okay, I'll ask you questions about that. That's where you're at. I'll meet you where you're at. And if we phrase it as a question, you might be at a similar where you're at as somebody else. Yeah, I'm at that level too. I can use that question. I can make that question my own. I might tweak it to make it more my own so it feels like it's mine. But yeah, that's a cool question. And I've been getting a lot of those, especially last time. This is what I was doing. I was thanking everyone who was here last time because they were sharing a lot of great questions. And I wanted to thank them for the courage to phrase what we're taught to make as declarative statements, because that's what makes you win a debate. That's what makes you certain, the image of knowledge. So it took some courage to change that way of expressing oneself into phrasing it as a question, which is very unfamiliar. It's very new. It's new territory. Of course, doing what the logos says is beneficial and good, in spite of what's familiar, that's the virtue of courage. And of course, doing what's comfortable or familiar or get you praised by the many, we see that can be fuel for our vices. So, thank you for everybody who joined me last time. I had a lot of people hanging out. It was a lot of fun. So on that note, here we are in the text. Socrates concludes that there is a hyparxis of all of the ideas. So from now on, if we wanted to refer to all of the self ideas, beauty, justice, goodness, same, different, whole, part, infinite, finite, greater, lesser, equal, all of those, time, in time, at a time, we could just use the one word, self-ousia. Same ousia. Because that's the hyparxis of all the beings. Which makes sense, because if there is one object of knowledge, then all of those ideas which we can know should ultimately be the same thing. Our soul knew it prior to our birth, and no other way could this logos even be discussed. Why? We wouldn't have the terms, the self-being terms, we wouldn't have the being terms, and we wouldn't have the relationships, being and logos. The relationship expressed through words and dialectic. But also, there is an equal necessity for our souls to exist before we're born in that hyparxis way. Simmias agreed, so he changed his mind. Wow. We're interested in what changes our mind because we want to do that to be good people. We don't want to be prejudiced. We don't want to be even prejudiced to things that are not normally considered prejudices. Like things that are accepted as normal. Like the physical world is all that exists. Or everybody should be entitled to their ignorance. Because there's no consequence of people being ignorant in the world, which of course is insane. Every holy war, every fascist political party, and so on. But it's normal, acceptable to say everybody's entitled to their ignorance, when it might be worthwhile to actually help people and in doing so solve problems. So we want to know what changes our mind. He says the logos takes refuge in beauty, in the same way that our soul and the ousia does, which you spoke of. Both exist before we were born. So the soul and the ousia existed before we were born, but also the logos must have too, according to Simmias, because he has been convinced by the logos. So necessity and beauty in the logos convinced him. just as there is beauty and necessity for our soul and the ousia to exist. Interesting, right? So the same conditions that were used in the argument to prove the existence of the ousia, it's beautiful that they come together in a hypostasis, and it's also necessary if there's a single object of knowledge. Same thing with our soul. It's beautiful that we all are of the same soul. We have the appearance in our physical world of many, but we're the same soul. Necessary if all souls have that same singular knowledge. But it's also beautiful that we're all one, isn't it? Isn't ugliness the opposite of beauty? And isn't ugliness what happens if we divide people? Isn't that the essence of what everybody is saying is causing problems? We're all so divided. It's always us versus them, left versus right, our country versus the other country, woke versus fascist or whatever. It's always division. And we point out, the rich are always trying to get us to fight each other because we're not addressing the cause of the problem. The pathologos, the tyranny playing out of people who are rich. And what's the cause of that? Well, Socrates is saying that's because they're not philosophers, they're not lovers of learning, wisdom, and phronesis, philomathesis, philosophy, and philophronesis. They have the shadow, which is what? Lover of the body, philosomatos, that manifests as one or both of lover of honor, fame, philotimos, and lover of riches, philokrimos, krimatos, cremated tomatoes. Yes, that's the cause. Oh, no. Fight against yourselves. Look at that guy. Doesn't he look a little bit different than you? Yeah. But remember when you were like a 100,000-year-old caveman and part of your evolution was to learn that anyone who was different is from a different cave and therefore bad and potentially a threat because we were cavemen before language? Yeah. Look, different. Don't you want to fear him and hate him? Yeah, sure. That's the con. That's always the con. Conservatives have that as their doctrine. They specifically say it's easier to motivate people through fear of others than it is to enlighten them through the truth of their opinions. So, isn't it beautiful that we're all of the same soul, as well as necessary? So the same arguments, the same logos showing the beauty and necessity for soul and ousia, Simmias says also applies to the reasoning itself. Isn't that fascinating? So not only are we learning about our souls, that we're the same soul, and that we're immortal, and that we know everything, and that learning is just remembering. Not only are we also, as well as that, learning about ousia, the nature of being, the cause of our physical world, the metaphysics, but there is an inherent, understandable, rational structure within both of those to make that argument that allows us to share in the dialectic and logos in order to learn. So the same beauty and necessities could be a key part of justice, by the way. Don't take that for granted. That's a question. That's just one of my questions I've had for a while is what's the relationship between justice, self-justice, and necessity? So there's a necessity and beauty in the soul and ousia, but also in the reasoning about those things. And that's what he's using. That's what he's recognizing. You can see necessity in this argument, in the reasoning of the argument, because we're rational. And you can recognize the beauty in it because you're not just rational, you are intelligible. You have those two things, understanding and knowing. You can recognize beauty. Even without, hey, if a beautiful woman walked down the street, you're going to notice. You can't help it. You don't have to be convinced. Let me explain why I'm beautiful. Same thing with a joke. Let me explain why this was funny. You either see it or you don't. That's the state of mind. What's the other part of being human? Reason. Reason and state of mind. They're the two. That's philosophy, right? Understanding and knowledge. Dianoia and nous. And both. Rational necessity and a recognition of beauty. Not just for the soul and ousia, but also for the logos. So that can give us a new question. Does that mean that one of logos isn't just the human endeavor, the use of our reasoning well, like playing the game, knowing the game rules and doing it properly, within the structure of the dialectic? It's not just our way home and a way to solve problems, the logos through the dialectic. But it also might have this universal existence. This, not universal as in the universe, but objectively universal, primarily in the realm of being. The realm of being, Usia might have as one of its aspects logos too. Interesting. Simmias is saying necessarily, and Socrates said, hey, we have to for the logos to even be discussed. He gave us a bit of a clue earlier on. Simmias picked up on it, so good for him. And good for us to notice it. The whole soul, self-ousia, and the logos. All aspects of what truly exists. Interesting. Hey, that might make sense of why our ticket to the nightclub where Socrates is telling us to hurry as quick as we can just to meet him at, maybe having the logos and dialectic in our back pocket is the ticket in, because it's logos is the nature. Or the highest, maybe it's the hyparxis nature. He did say ousia is, but within ousia, where does it logos fit? That's a question. But fascinating. This is the thing about philosophy. It makes everything so simple. Like, what are we doing here? Just one thing, logos. That's all. But how do we do that? Well, you got to first discover it, find a question, and then find the answer. So it's just question and answers. Yeah, but how do you do that? How do we use question and answers? Oh, that's just the dialectic. Really? Yeah, you're always doing it. To have a question about the text, you had to have a question about the text to even read it. You have to have a question about philosophy or yourself to follow this, to watch this video. And Socrates is giving us the answers in a special kind of way where we have to play. We have to solve the puzzles, put on our Sherlock Holmes hat, be an adventurer. So it's an artful use of answers. Just as we are being artful in our questions. We are being clever in our questions. We are sharing our questions with our friends in the community. And we have a Discord now as well. There should be a link somewhere. Last time, people asked if there could be a way of connecting and sharing our work with each other and our questions with each other. So we started a Discord, so you're welcome to join. So simple, just the logos. How did you get there? Question and answers. What's that? Dialectic. Well, then once I have all of these relationships and terms, what do I do with it? Oh yeah, you know the dialectic that we just mentioned? It's that. Put it into a dialectic. Well, then what? Well, I mean, so long as you're also doing it to the counterattacks that come up, because you are a human, you have something in the place where the logo should be. But so long as you're doing the dialectic to both the shadow and the logos, then you'll purify and perfect yourself. That's the game. Solving the problems, just like a video game. What do you do in a video game? Pretty much two things. You solve whatever problem is in the world. Maybe you're playing God of War and you're Kratos and, I don't know, Zeus is going to blow up the earth. You got to save the earth. But you also level up your character to get strong enough to fight Zeus at the end. To solve the problem and level up your character. Yay, Discord. Right, I just set it up, so if you notice anything that should be done to improve it, let me know. Or purify it or perfect it, make it more excellent. There you go. So simple. Play the game, be rational, join the human race. Okay, let's say you do it. Yeah, okay, so I purified the logos. You've purified my false logos, my anti-logos, or pathologos. And I perfected my climbing of the ladder through the logos. Now what? Oh, now you get let into this club. The divine self will, because you're being most like the divine, you're being most pure yourself. So long as you've been practicing it, which is all the virtues are pretty much just that. Practicing that all the time. Desiring it all the time, number one. Holding on to the conclusions to that, even though it feels like it might not be true, but the logo says it's true. Holding on to what the logo says, even though you might be afraid or desire something else, that's courage. Using it in everything you do, that's wisdom. Doing it all the time, that's justice. So that's the virtues. It's just the same thing. It's just the one thing. You get led into the club. Well, then once I'm in the realm of being, once I'm with the whole soul, what do? Keep playing. But you'll be playing with Socrates now. Well, what about the world? It's hard to do that when we're being forced to compete with ourselves for capitalism or whatever, or because we're getting bombed by some other country. It's hard. Yeah. Well, how do you solve those problems? Same thing. Why? Socrates pointed out everything in the physical world is reaching out to self-being, self-ousia, and is to remind us of self-ousia and self-being. Practice the dialectic, you'll be able to share it with everybody. And then finally, we'll have a standard. Every news network, you're not going to get away with asking softball questions or avoiding the point or just having people yell at each other for clickbait or propaganda. No, you either follow the dialectic or you're engaged in vice. Simple. Same thing with every politician. What's your principle? What's the law you want to pass? Okay, that's an if statement. That's a hypothesis. You're going to have to do two for a dialectic. If this law exists, what follows? And if it doesn't, what follows? There has to be a logos necessity and a beauty to show why it's beneficial, or a contradiction or hypocrisy or harm that follows if it's not. Otherwise, it's corruption. Simple. Isn't it simple? That's why I love philosophy. It makes things so simple. Or rather, it was always simple, but the logos and dialectic, thankfully we have the text, helps us to see what was simple the whole time. Just like if you're playing a RPG and you're with a party, but you've just added a thief to your party. He goes, "Oh, don't go down that road. There are traps." Like, what do you mean? "Oh, we used to always go down that road. Thankfully, you're here." Yeah, the traps were there the whole time. The thief had to level up his skill so he could recognize what was there the whole time. And that's what understanding does for us, because we see through our understanding. So the better we get at the dialectic, the more fun we're going to have reading Socrates, because we'll realize, oh, I know what he's doing. That's definition. Oh, that's a division. Oh, I know, he's asking where you're at, or he's asking where you're stuck. And hey, every author. So maybe after we nail down the dialectic and logos, we can read other spiritual texts or have watch-alongs with other popular philosophers and say, oh, this is where they're at. This is their logos and vision. Their understanding and nous. We can map it on the dialectics. Easy. Oh, and they keep repeating this word, this logos. Or they keep having this negative state of mind. That's where they're stuck. Cool. Then maybe one of them can get on their podcast and ask them questions to help them. Why not? It could be fun. So, which is why we jumped into the Phaedo in the first place, by the way. The second hypothesis of Parmenides was getting a bit tricky, so I thought we should do a side quest and really level up our seeing and take that seeing back with us into the second hypothesis of Parmenides. So, cool.
Wow. 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 Wow.
So, Simmias, after his division, Simmias has to do Socrates did the synthesis and analysis. He synthesized them together. Literally, he synthesized all of the being terms into the same ousia, and he synthesized the soul into a single soul, which is great because we have been really fortunate to have the Balboa translation of Procholus's Elements of Plato's Theology, and we can recognize in that, let's pull it up. Yep. The anagogic or upward moving triad, according to Proclus, has Apollo, which is the text we're reading, Aphrodite, applying it to our own state of mind and lives and problems, come together. Oh, and here's our the mean analogy that we've been talking about. The primary kinds of analogies are mean analogies. It's not, looking at the text here, it's not king is to people as shepherd is to sheep. It's Hermes is to Aphrodite as Aphrodite is to Apollo. So that's an example of a mean analogy. But Apollo with Aphrodite leads to Hermes, which is the dialectic. What does he do? Elevates souls. Through her, he sends upwards both the whole soul and partial soul. So he helps us by pointing out, that there is a whole soul and there are partial souls. Whatever your level you're at, you are raised to the good self, which is beyond even being. So if the whole soul is united with being, you still can use the dialectic and her powers to lift your soul up to the good self. There's still another game once you get into the club, we would say. So that's cool that we have that. Got a mythology. We can represent the dialectic through this mythology, which helps us to remember it. So like it's a mnemonic device, we would say. And of course, if you're a video game maker or if you've got long-term plans in the creative field, you could have literally Apollo, Aphrodite, and Hermes as characters in the game, which would be rad. And you could sneak into the game this information, meaning people could play the game as it is on the surface, or they could discover their own question the same way we have been discovering questions in the text. So write a game like Plato writes a text. Because if you discover the questions, it's sort of you're more interested in it. It's more your own. You nurture it, you protect it more. And you have fun. You be more eager to share it with your friends. Like a Christopher Nolan movie. There is the main line question, but then there's the, Fight Club is an example of this too. There's a hidden question in there that you can solve. But you would only solve it if you first discovered the question. So you could hide this, and then you realize, well, actually, this character in this game that I'm playing maybe represents something. What's all this dialectic? Why are these NPC characters talking about Hermes and dialectic? So that's fun. So, partial souls and whole souls lifted up through the dialectic powers, which is the hyparxis, the top of the pyramid that we see here, of Apollo and Aphrodite. Philosophy and applying it to our own insights. Beauty. Oh, and by the way, what convinced Simmias to change his mind? The necessity in the logos, which could be, you could connect that to Apollo if you like. And the beauty in the arguments, you could connect that to Aphrodite, who, through insights of love, which pervades the whole when you see it together as a whole, familiarizes and reconciles the lives that are elevated to herself, by herself, to the beautiful. Beauty is part of the game. You wouldn't be in it. You wouldn't desire it if it wasn't beautiful in some way. So interesting. The dialectic Hermes was convincing to Simmias because there was an Apollo necessity and a Aphrodite beauty that he recognized. That's cool. I mean, is that enough to solve the question, what should change our mind? I'm not sure. For me, it's still a question, but we have a lot of material in our hypothesis sack, our if sack. So maybe one day we'll do a dialectic on what should change our mind. And we'd include all these things that we've been reflecting on in it. Keep in mind, here's our image, our mythology, us, the philosophical adventurer, with our question sack, our mythology sack, our dialectic sack, but our hypothesis sack and our question sack are the two big ones, these two here. Oops. hypothesis, and questions. So we can add Hermes, Aphrodite, and Apollo into this question, this hypothesis related to this question. What should change our mind properly? What should actually change our mind? Whoa. Which is cool. If some bully's like, hey, change your mind, do what I say. Actually, you have to show that there is a logos necessity and a beauty in the order of putting together that logos. Otherwise, I would be unjust to change my mind. What? Yeah, learn the dialectic. That would be funny. And good. The same necessity, says Simmias, after you've synthesized it, you've brought all of the Usias to the same Usia, you've brought all of the souls to the same souls, you've linked them together as knowing each other in knowledge, and you've also pointed out, hey, not only does this conclude our souls existed before we were born and had knowledge, but even the logos had to have too for this logos to even be discussed. The same for them as for it as the other ones too. Simmias says, okay, I've heard the dialectic, and the same necessity appears to me to be so absolutely, O Socrates, and the logos indeed takes refuge in beauty, in the same way as our soul does, and the ousia which you speak of does. Both exist before we were born, for to me at least there is nothing so clear as this, that all natures such as these most especially do exist. As if it exists, side A of the dialectic, such as the beautiful and the good and all those you just spoke of just now, and it appears to me to be sufficiently demonstrated. Yay. Cool. What does Socrates say? Let's have a drink. Socrates says, but what about Cebes over here? For we must necessarily persuade Cebes too. What?
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 What? Simmias says he is sufficiently convinced. All right, Simmias. Speak for your friend. He is sufficiently convinced. At least I believe. I believe at least. And yet he is the most obstinate of humans as far as being mistrustful of speech, of, what's the word? Logos. Do you know people like that? Socrates runs into people like that sometimes. Socrates, I don't trust this logos. You seem to back people into a corner and then they agree with what they don't actually believe, and I don't trust speech. Right? Somebody shared that from their background. I grew up in a culture where we're taught to distrust logos. Therefore, you can only believe somebody else. There are certain questions that can't be answered, that kind of thing. And we admire him for sharing that, because say that in a lot of groups, they be made fun of. But no, it's important. It's in the text too. A lot of people, our whole culture. If all human beings have problems, and if within the logos of humanity, we're at the stage where we don't yet have what we need to solve problems, the logos and dialectic, then we would be being ruled by our anti-logos, our pathologos, the false idea of the self, which means the most common cultural ways of being and thinking and feeling should be afraid of the mind, afraid of the logos, or afraid of the one self above the divine. Necessarily. So this mistrustful of logos, or understanding isn't to be trusted or is bad or is to be feared, like I heard in church every day, that would necessarily follow if the ruling culture is that of the pathologos, the shadow. Because the true self needs the Logos. We just went through the Logos. He was able to change his mind and learn about soul and being and even Logos itself. So we can relate to our friend Cebes here. I mean, literally, Socrates was entrusted. Hey, you can listen to his arguments. Just follow his arguments and you'll change your mind too if you're not completely ruled by your fear of reasoning and truth. Those three things: fear reasoning, fear the truth or mind or being, and fear the oneself. Unfortunately, a lot of people in positions of power were ruled by their voice and they sentenced Socrates to death. So, we can relate to this Cebes chap here. He is the most obstinate of humans as far as being mistrustful of speech, since I believe that he is not in need of being persuaded of this, that our souls existed before we were born. However, in no way does it appear that it has also been proven to me whether self exists even after we die. Since the opinion of the many, funny because when Socrates first met Parmenides when he was 19, so Parmenides said, where you at, where you stuck, and where you're stuck was, this is the quote on the screen, but now since you are still young, you give heed to the opinions of human beings. And Zeno chimes in and says, the many are ignorant that without this discursive procession through the beings, the dialectic, it happens to be impossible for the intellect to hold on to the truth. So, caring about the opinions of the many was his problem that Socrates had early on in his life. So this gives us more stakes. If Socrates at the end of his life is being presented with a problem that he himself had at the start of his life, we can now have a question. Oh, how does Socrates deal with it? How much did he level up? Was he able to solve his problem and with such mastery that he can help others solve a similar problem? Because this is the same thing that he was at. No, thumbs up, not thumbs down, thumbs up. Thumbs up. And also, fireworks. So, interesting symmetry between the Parmenides and the Phaedo. Since the opinion of the many, which Cebes mentioned now, is still standing in the way, our false beliefs stand in the way of being convinced through the dialectic. That whenever the human soul dies, self is dissipated. Actually, I could even go capital S. Self is dissipated, scattered. And this is the end of her existence. Oh well. Self is scattered, and that's the end of her existence. For on the one hand, let it be given that self comes to be and is put together from some other source and exists even before she enters the human body. Let it be given. But on the other hand, after having done this, she also departs. Then what is there to keep self from also coming to an end and from being utterly destroyed at that time? Even if we take what we've just agreed that had to be from somewhere and it had to be in death, and we had to have known it, had knowledge in there from the Hyparxis whole soul and the whole of Usia for us to even have this discussion. We take that for granted, that we had knowledge and existence before birth. What prevents us from ending when our body ends? Cebes jumps in. You speak well, O Simmias, for even as it seems that only half of what is necessary has been proven, that our soul existed before we were born. But, on the other hand, it is necessary to further prove that she will exist no less, after our death, if the proof intends to have completion. Socrates jumps in. Well, on the one hand, even now, it has already been proven. O Simius and Zebes, O Beavis and Butthead. If you will combine this logos with the same one which we agreed on before this one, that all the living are generated from the dead. That's the resource argument. Remember the four we had? Can't be a straight line because we'll end up like Enderman. So it has to be circular. If there's a living and dying, there's also a being dead and coming to life because of the back and forth of the physical world. And finally, we have to have we have to have resources. This is the resources argument. We have to have come from somewhere, not physical. Maybe. Or it's the circular one. I'm not sure which one he's pointing to. Let's see. And also the learning is remembering is the fourth one we got from CBs. Okay. If the soul exists... Okay, combine it with the logos we agreed on before this one. That all the living are generated from the dead. Resources. For if on the one hand... Let's highlight that. Oops, not that color though. For if on the one hand, the soul exists before, then on the other hand, it is necessary that when the self arises into life, and also by having been born, self must come to be from nowhere else than from the dead and from being dead. Right, it's the circular. Has to be, so we have born, and alive is to dead, no. Being a life is to dead, as being born is to being dead. No, that's not true. It would be dying. So let's remove that. How could it not necessarily be for self to exist after death, seeing that self must indeed come to life again? Thus, the very thing you speak of has even now been proven. So two arguments. It had to be from somewhere, the resources argument, which has to be the place of being dead. And if it's circular, it has to be coming from dead into life, just as we go from life to death. We have a picture from our translator here. Nature is to be lame in this case, the lame argument. The soul remembers true perfection which exists somewhere other than the visible realm. Being born is to dying, as awakening is to falling asleep. The process of restoration, the yoked pairs. Otherwise, there's the straight line of falling asleep. Without the cyclical process, everyone would eventually be asleep like Enderman. So yeah, our translator brought those 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3 arguments. The yoked pairs, so we're not asleep. Nature not being lame, the theory of remembering, and the analogy. Asleep and falling asleep is an analogous to being born and dying, which is the He's missing the resources one. But yeah, this analogy is for the nature being lame. We have to have this analogy, otherwise nature would be lame. So yeah, helpful. And the eternal Usean beings and the recollection of their one summit the same self. The same self of being. Nevertheless, says Socrates, even though that's kind of implied in these arguments, well, it is in these arguments, on the other hand, it appears to me that you and Simmias would also be pleased to thoroughly examine the logos even more, and that unreal fear. Fear. The fear of children. Children have this fear, that the wind dissolves and scatters self when departing from the body. At the time when one happens to die, not in calm air, but in high wind. In high wind. Dissolving and scatters the self. Right? Dust to dust. We become worm food, some people say. CB's laughs. We have a sound effect for that. CB's became a group of people laughing. And then became one person again and said, assuming that we have that fear, O Socrates. Oh, okay, not really eager to admit it for himself. Assuming we have that fear, Socrates, try to persuade us, or rather, on the other hand, assume we are not afraid, but perhaps there is a child in us which has the fears such as these, right? This is as true today as it is back then, right? How many times have you seen in a comedy sketch or a sitcom where someone wants to save face and goes, oh yeah, oh no, I get it because I'm the boss. But explain it for everybody else that might not understand. Explain it for the home audience. And pretend you're explaining it to a child. As literally a line in The Office, Steve Carell says, explain what is it? Oscar has a budget surplus that Steve has to spend by the end of the day. And Steve goes, oh, I know what a surplus is. I'm the manager. But explain it to me like you're explaining it to a 5-year-old. Goes, well, your mummy gave you $10 to start a lemonade stand, but you bought sugar and lemons, and you paint for your stand, and it only cost you $8 to set up the stand. That means your mum thinks it only costs $8 to set up a stand, so next summer she's only going to give you $8. So you need to spend that $2, so she thinks it costs $10 to set up a stand. That's what a surplus is. And then there's a whole episode where they have to decide whether they buy a new copier or new chairs. So that was a little tangent, but this idea of, oh no, well, try and persuade us as though we have that fear. Explain it to a child. Let's attempt to persuade this inner child not to fear death, just as death were a mormolukia, a fantastic she-monster, a boogeyman. Let's find this word. So we've got Enderman, and we've got Mormolukia. Mormon with leukemia? Mormolukia. Does that sound like a character we have? Let's find it. So yeah, while it is funny that he seems to be trying to save face, also it is true that it is an inner child that has this fear. We develop these fears of death when we are young. And as we were talking about today, as we developed the false image of the self when we were young, based on an image of beauty. Let's bring up the thing. No, not that. Here we go. Momolikia. 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 Let's go for it. Momolikia. A hobgoblin or a boogeyman, says Wiktionary. And the lexicon takes a bit of time sometimes, so... Right, it's a boogeyman. Or a hobgoblin. So attempt to persuade our inner child not to fear death, just as if death were a hobgoblin. A boogeyman. A kukui. What's a kukui? Translator relates it to something called a kukui. Kukui is a tree. Kukui. Kukui is a character in Pokemon who starts his own league. Kukui. Professor Kukui. Kukui is a Pokemon trainer in Pokemon Masters EX based on the character of the same name in the core game series. Professor Kukui. He studies Pokemon moves and is married to Professor Burnett. He is the father of Lee, his son with Professor Burnett. He's a young man with muscular physique. Okay, we don't have to go on a Pokemon tangent. But I don't think this is the person that the translator was thinking of. I don't know if Juan Balboa is a Pokemon fan. So, persuade us not to fear death as if it was a imaginary Pokemon trainer. An imaginary boogeyman or hobgoblin. But it is necessary, says Socrates, to sing to self every day. Right, here we go again. Every day meet at the prison gates of where Socrates is. Every day meet up with your friends there to talk about the logos and to listen to the logos about self. Every day meet there until the guard lets you in to see Socrates, which is an analogous to the doctrine. We have to repeat the doctrine to each other often. We have to repeat the dialectic and perfect our dianoia often. To do it all the time is the virtues until the divine self lets us in. It's layers of the same thing. He's saying, hey, not only do we have to keep practicing reading this text together, returning together, making it a pattern, making it a habit, but also we have to repeat the process of the dialectic on our problems. We have to also be doing it on our problems every day. Now, of course, Plato doesn't go into midwifery in his books. I recommend the Philosophical Midwifery text by Dr. Pierre Grimes for that, which we could read in the channel sometime in the near future. But Socrates is saying it's necessary to sing to self every day until you shall sing them away. Interesting. He's been talking about writing songs, using pre-existing songs from Aesop and making his own, because his dreams have been instructing him to. So, sing songs that can address your inner child's fear of death every day until you sing them away. So applying the dialectic to your problems has the effect of dissipating them one day. CB says, where then shall we find a good singer of such particulars? So he points out the particulars. We've seen already that dianoia is the habitual practice of explaining the particulars. In fact, even Parmenides talked about the particulars. That was one of the repeating terms earlier in the text, of course. Can you give us details and particulars, Phaedo, of what Socrates did and said and how he died? Okay, let's keep going. So he, maybe he's adding the idea of dialectic to the idea of singing, maybe, by speaking about the particulars. So where will we find a good singer when you leave us of such particulars? Socrates says, and notice also that in the argument of learning from recollection, he said, hey, not only did we know knowledge before we were born, we must have necessarily forgotten it, because even though some people claim to know everything, how many people can give a good logos of the particulars of self-beauty, self-truth, self-justice, self-goodness? And CB said, well, I fear that when you leave us tomorrow, or tonight, by tomorrow there'll be nobody left. Like, you're the only one who can do it, Socrates. Therefore, not only did we have knowledge before we were born, we must have forgotten it upon birth. So here is CB's again saying, when you're gone, where will we find a singer like that? Socrates says, Hellas, on the one hand, is a large country, O Cebes, in which there are certainly good people. On the other hand, the non-Hellenic races are also numerous. All those which it is necessary to thoroughly search for such a singer. That is being sought for, sparing neither expense nor toil, as there is nothing on which you should more necessarily spend money. If you are to spend money on anything, it's on a singer who can sing the kinds of songs that can dispense with your fear of death, as though singing to a child about the boogeyman not being real. It is necessary for yourselves to search among one another also, for it is likely you will not easily discover those able to do this better than yourselves. So hey, us in the game, us reading this text, us who are here at Socrates' last day, we are likely going to be the sorts of people who are going to be able to do this more than others. Why? Because we are the ones engaged in learning the dialectic, and the dialectic applied to our false beliefs and fears, specifically about the nature of life and death and soul and truth. That's philosophical midwifery. That's the kind of singing he's talking about. So, amongst ourselves, as we build this community, as we get to know each other, as we learn the logos and dialectic more, it's likely we'll find those kinds of singers ourselves and become those kind of singers ourselves. Makes sense. But if you find someone who can do it, that's where you spend your money on. CB says, on the one hand, right, yes, join the Discord. And there's a link below. On the one hand, This shall be surely done. But on the other hand, let us go back to where we left off, if it's appealing to you. Of course, says Socrates. It is indeed appealing. How could it not be? Interesting. So yeah, my last breaths, the last moments I have on life, I'm going to spend it addressing your false belief about death and dying. Oh, okay. It should be, if you click on the heading that says, if you click on the heading, whoops. The heading that says, let me see if it's there. Oh, it's yeah, let me move it around. Yeah, it's the link. Let me know if it works. I'll get rid of the other panel. There we go. I literally just set it up this morning. Cool. Yes, join the Discord and practice your songs. Share your songs with people. Which is interesting because we've been talking about that all the way along, right? We've been talking about doing our dialectics, thumbs up, but also mythologizing them. We talked about making our own games and our own movies and our own fan fiction and stuff. But yeah, make your own songs too. Let's go back. Right at the beginning. Right at the beginning. One of the first things Socrates says. The first thing he said was take self home, which is curious. Second thing he says is the warring opposites of the physical world, like pleasure and pain, are united at the top, which is interesting because we're uniting the warring souls. Yes, take self home. Yeah. Yes. Very interesting. Like the back and forth of the physical world, dying and coming to be dead, seem to be united at the top, escaping the cycles of reincarnation, we might call it. Reconcile the warring opposites of selves in the physical world, united to the same. Yeah, he's putting what he's been teaching into verse using the logos of Aesop, like Aesop's fables. Interesting that we know Aesop's fables even today. That's pretty cool. But he's doing his own hymn to Apollo, who we now recognize is the god of philosophy, the personification. Because he's getting repeated commands from the muse through dreams, which is interesting. O Socrates, his dream said, make and work at music. I thought it was encouraging me, because philosophy is the greatest music. Encouraging me exactly as I was doing, just like encouraging runners in a race. Run the race. I am running. I know, I'm cheering you. That kind of thing. But he says he's also going to compose popular music in obedience to the dream as well. This is the first thing he said. So after the god, on the one hand, I realized that if the poet indeed cares about being a poet, he must compose myths, not discourse. I'm not a myth maker, but I used the myths of Aesop, which I knew and I had at hand. Tell my friend Cebes, tell Euvenos. The U can be a V here. Tell Euvenos to be strong, and if he has the virtue of temperance, follow me as quickly as possible, because I'm departing today as the Athenians order it. Don't kill yourself, don't do violence, of course. Here we go. For it is perhaps especially fitting, since I am about to journey there, and so to both thoroughly examine in detail and mythologize about the journey to that place and what kind of place we think self is. For what else should one do in the time before the sun sets? Very poetic. So he's saying, hey, make popular music, which is examining and mythologizing. We've come to learn that. Good question in the chat. What if we are the myths? That would mean something. That we would be playing out the implications of a certain dialectic, because to thoroughly examine, we're learning is the dialectic. And we talked about, hey, once you do a dialectic on an idea, mythologize it. You can use Aesop, you can use Spider-Man, you can make up your own, and you can make songs. Yes. In the chat, what if we are the myths? It would mean we are constructs working something out like a dialectic. I like it. Which has to be so if we can look at the playing out of the patterns in our problems in our world and realize it's playing out the implications or playing out the division stage of a certain problem that we're here to have. And if Socrates is saying, hey, what is more real is the realm of being, coming to be alive and dying is a cyclical process that we are wanting to do our work in but then leave, then it does seem to make sense what you're saying. We're working something out, and once we work it out, we're done. But you might not like that if you think that place you go to when you're done is bad, like a boogeyman. So we have to mythologize and explain that place of pure being, where knowledge is, where the self-being is. So we could say that, right, so in one sense you could say, we are living like a dream. This is kind of a dream. And just like when you're dreaming, you don't remember that you were alive. So too, while we're in this life, we don't have a memory of being dead. So this could be a playing out of our problems, like we say, dialectically, meaning we have what we need to solve problems, thank goodness. Apply the dialectic. If we're unfolding the dialectic, we can return home to the cause and solve our problem. And then when we leave, like we're saying in the chat, when we leave, we can ourselves become a myth. If we've lived a good life, we can become ourselves a myth for what it means to become somebody who has purified and perfected themselves through the logos. Sung the songs that dissipate the false beliefs about death and dying, and sung the songs that encourage us and lead us to the truth. Welcome to the chat, the Furia. See, I don't know if it would be impossible to explain. It might be difficult. It might be difficult to explain. You might need analogy and myth to explain. And that's kind of how we think. We talked about understanding how to be a good ruler by referring to something lesser. Like, how does a shepherd take care of his sheep to understand how you would rule people? So too, it might be difficult to explain to people the nature of being if they're not familiar with it. But I think Socrates is showing us how you might do it. Through reasoned arguments, the dialectic, and also maybe through mythology. Mythology can be a good way in, actually. And he wants to do both. And you could say Socrates has therefore become a myth for what it means to have lived a good life. And have slayed the boogeymans. Right. If you get the first pick of your incarnation, you could pick the best one God. That also plays into this. If we do have a choice in our reincarnation, maybe this kind of learning will guide our choice in a good kind of a way. Myth being the study of reality for people who can understand more subtle aspects. Interesting. Yeah, you could have. That's an interesting thing about myths. You might be casting a wide net. If you create the dialectic first and you use your myths and have a correspondence, and of course that's how Plato writes. He will say, here is a list of terms on one side of analogy. Here's one or two on the other side. You've got to figure out. You got to go through the whole text and fill it out. That's called abduction. You have like a king is to his people as a shepherd is to his sheep, is to his tent, is to his cart, is to his dog. You got to find out what the higher meaning for those lesser terms are. But for somebody who's new to the game, and they might not realize they're here to discover questions too, just that first explanation, understanding how a king should rule by using a shepherd in your myth, might be helpful for them. So the further somebody is along in their learning, the more they might discover in your myth, like a Christopher Nolan movie. The more times you see it, the more depth you see in it. Kind of like everything we do with our dialectic. The more times you've done a dialectic on the soul, the more you'll see in it, the more depth you'll see in it. And the better you'll be able to navigate the sort of conversations with your friends the way Socrates is navigating it with Simmias and Cebes. Right, in the Republic, the guy who got to pick his life was lamenting because he picked a bad life. Right, at the end of the Republic, there's talk of picking your next reincarnation. And Socrates says, hey, you better spend this life tracking down someone who can help you understand what it means to pick a good life next time. Yeah, good questions. So, make these songs yourself. If you can find someone who can sing songs like this, who can purify yourself from the false beliefs about death and dying, there's nothing better to spend your money on than hiring those musicians to play at your party. But it's better to search among one another also, for it is likely that you will not easily discover those more able to do this better than yourselves. So join the Discord, share your songs with each other. So, by the way, let's go back to where we left off if you want Socrates. Socrates says, yeah, sure. It is indeed appealing. How could it not be? Cebes says, it is good that you say this. Socrates. Is it not the case, then, that we must necessarily ask ourselves something like this? For what kind of nature is it proper to undergo this experience, that of being dispersed? And for what purpose? Of preventing what kind of experience is self-dispersion feared? And what kind of nature does not undergo the experience of self-dispersion? Okay? What kind of nature is it proper to undergo this experience? Why is it feared? And what kind of nature does not undergo self-dispersion? And after this, in turn, we should examine to which of the two is the soul akin? Is the soul like that which disperses or not? And as a result of this, we should be of good cheer or fear for the sake of our soul. He's setting up the conditions for what's going to follow. What you say is true. Take notice then, on the one hand, that which is composite is composed by its very nature properly undergoes this dispersion. For this nature is divided in the same way as it was composed. Whereas on the other hand, if indeed this other something properly and simply happens to be incomposite, it will not undergo this experiences. Okay? Composition, composite. If something is comprised of composite natures in its creation, its ending, it will disperse at its end. It will divide the same way it was composed. Whereas if something is incomposite, properly and simply incomposite, it will not. Make sense? Simi says yes, has to be. CBs. Is it not the case then, in order for this to always exist according to the same and be maintained in the same way, it will most likely be akin to these that are incomposite? But on the other hand, those which can change from one state to another and never abide according to the same are incomposite. Okay, here's interesting. Never abide according to the same. Which is interesting because the first category about dialectic is self by self. Self according to the same. If you can read reality, you will end up with an analogy that can be turned into many stories. Absolutely. And Socrates is saying, hey, if you can make those stories, people should spend their money hiring you to sing for them. Okay? If you can always exist according to the same. Now, the word for same is the same as self, or tied together in an interesting way in the Greek. So, if you can never abide according to the same, you are composite. So this will go different color. Never abide by the same, you are incomposite. Oops. Then let us, CB says, yep, it appears to be. Then let us return to those same incomposite natures from which the logos proceeded before. Right, so we just went through logos to show that there is the incomposite that can abide by itself, always existing. The beings which have the hyparxis in the single self-ousia, souls, the single soul, the whole soul, and the logos can exist singularly in being. So to see if the self-ousia, to which we granted existence by the logos, by questions and answers, there's our dialectic in action, always has to be maintained according to the same, or whether it varies from one state to another, or if the self-equal, the self-beautiful. Here's our, why does it go that color? The self-equal, the self-beautiful, and every self-being which exists are also never susceptible to any metabolic transformation whatsoever. So in that previous argument, he said all of those things that have being, all the selfers, are united to the same self-ousia. So he could talk about either. He could talk about the singular thing, or he could talk about them in terms of the divisions, or the divisions, the intellectual distinctions you can make about the single self-ousia. What is self-ousia? What is the being that exists? You grant existence by the logos. It's also equal, perfectly equal. It's the paradigm for what makes it equal. It's also the paradigm for beauty. It's also the paradigm for existence and being. Are they never susceptible to any transformation? Or does one of selves who always exists, by abiding uniformly, self by self, have to remain in the same way according to the same? So this probably is one of those self-er terms. If all of them, if it turns out, all of those selves which always exist have to remain the same, then you could say the same is one of those qualities of being. So the same becomes in that list with self-equal, self-beautiful, self-being, self-goodness, self-same. From the chat, Socrates sounds like he has the fighter's ability to go void. Interesting. Before something or someone hits you. No fear, just acceptance that it affects you the way less. Oh, right. Like that character from the old guy from Bucky, who goes limp and does not resist the punch and doesn't get hurt by it. Is that what you mean? So do all of them that exist abiding uniformly, self by self, and of course we recognize self by self? Right. We recognize self by self as the first category of the dialectic. So that's interesting. So we're doing this thing called dialectic to bring ourselves to the self-ousia, out of the body, which is the experience of death, which unites our individual souls to its primary whole soul. We get there through the dialectic, through the questions and answers and the logos right here. And the first category of that is self by self. So the very thing we're using to get there describes the nature of what we're going to join with. Self by self, abiding uniformly, unchanging, incomposite. So, do each of the selves that always exist abide uniformly, self by self, wink wink? So these are sort of clues. Like we can recognize, if we've been doing dialectic all the way along, you should recognize this jump out to you a little bit as a clue. Have to remain in the same way, according to the same, and never in any way be susceptible to alteration whatsoever. Wow, big words. Okay. Never be susceptible to alteration. That's the prelude. Non-composite. Yeah, non-composite. Okay, so either the self-ousia, which we granted existence by the logos, and all the other things that are of that same nature, do they exist uniformly, self by self, remaining the same according to the same? The self by self or same according to same? Interesting. Or are they composite and undergo transformation? CB says they must remain in the same way according to the same, O Socrates. Right? If we said that all of these beings are the same self-ousia, we can't say that self-ousia stays the same, but not the other things too. On the other hand, says Socrates, what are the others, such as humans, or horses, or clothes? Or other such things whatsoever? Or those that are equal or beautiful? Or all those with the same name as those? Okay, so he's picked out physical things. He's just gone through the list of beings, self-ers, and now he's picked out humans and horses and clothes. But also those that use the self-er terms as adjectives. So philosophy, one way of defining philosophy is movement from adjectives to substantives, from adjectives to nouns. Back to our notes, we talked about how both when following the dialectic up or following the dialectic to purify ourselves from our problems, we start with sense perception particulars. Examples of beauty, justice, and goodness, or examples of war, discord, and genocide that are the consequence of our human mythology playing out its negative dialectic. We start from the particulars. We start from things that can be described with adjectives. Beautiful things, just things, good things. And we talked about last time about this ladder that we climb. Here he's saying, those things, horses, humans, clothes, and other such things, but also those who have, we mentioned self-equal and self-beauty, but not that, but have them as adjectives. Equal sticks, beautiful people, and all those of the same, that have the same name as those things as being. Do they have to remain according to the same, or do they exist in a total contrast to those beings? Selves neither subsisting according to selves, nor ever according to each other, or as to say it briefly, in no way remain according to the same. What the heck does that mean? So we know what according to the same means. They don't change. Nor do they exist in total contrast to those, or do they, okay, so they're either the same or they're in contrast to the beings. Because the beings exist. That's what makes them being. Literally, that's what the word being means. Okay, this next part. Selves neither subsisting according to selves, nor according to each other. Now this is confusing. We do, however, recognize these two as the first two categories of the dialectic. What can you say about the soul according to itself, self by self? And what can you say about the soul in relation to another, according to another? So that's definition and demonstration. So we recognize these are the dialectic. But how is he putting them the two of them together to refer to that which is always singular, uniform, the same, never changing, always existing? Well, look at it this way. He is saying there are some things with the same name. A beautiful horse, a beautiful person. But they are in contrast with those beings, either their own self-name. A beautiful horse is different to beauty itself in being, but also according to each other, the other beings. Not only is a beautiful horse different in relation to beauty itself, but it's also different to justice itself and equality itself and goodness itself. And therefore in no way remain according to the same. So this is interesting because when Socrates was given his dialectic instructions by Parmenides, the first example was to pick an idea. Category one is explain it itself in relation to itself. That's the first part. But the next category was in relation to the others. Now, normally dialectic is on beings because that's the sort of question we want to have, because that's the sort of thing we can unite with in contemplation. You don't want to be meditating on Tom Cruise, because if you sustain your concentration on a question into meditation and you sustain your question into contemplation, that's the transition point to contemplation, to uniting. But you can't unite with Tom Cruise. He's not something that exists in being. He's one of these horses and clothes and humans. So you normally do a dialectic on beings, self or soul, beauty, justice. This is what makes philosophy. It's not concerned with the physical world. It's not concerned with shoes and clothes and Bugattis. It's actually concerned with them least of all human beings, which makes us the people deserving of the death experience and upgrading to the next dimensions of reality. So normally the expression category 1 of the dialectic, self according to self, relates to these things: self equals self, beauty, and all the beings. And then self according to another, usually, or self according to the others, you usually talk about the other beings. So you do a dialectic on beauty. What can you say about it itself as one of the beings? And then how can you say beauty relates to the other beings? Beauty according to the others. That's usually what dialectics is. How does beauty affect the realm of being? What is the significance of being, self-ousia, containing beauty? Well, one thing you could say is humans will therefore seek it because it has beauty. Humans seek beauty. Or it makes justice beautiful. No, humans is one of the levels down. So you would say, what can you say about beauty itself? What can you say about beauty in relation to the others' ideas? Justice is beautiful. And if justice is beautiful, humans will seek... I'm bringing in humans again. I'm a human, so that's what I'm interested in. It makes justice beautiful. It gives a symmetry to justice. It gives a symmetry to goodness. It gives a proportion to the realm of being, to the many others. So we're relating beauty to the others. So this expression existing self according to self and self according to the others, each others, usually the others means the other beings. So Socrates is saying, hey, we do this dialectic on these beings, but humans don't subsist according to the self. The beautiful horse does not exist according to beauty itself, nor according to the other beings. Or to say it briefly, in no way remains according to the same, because those are the things that exist according to the same. Now that could be tricky to unpack. Fortunately, we had the Parmenides in our back pocket, and we had a familiarity with the dialectic ourselves. So we can unpack it. CB says, in this way, for they can never be in the same way. Horses, humans, clothes, or beautiful adjective things, or equal adjective things, can't exist according to themselves as the noun, or according to the other nouns in being. Socrates goes on. Is it not the case then that on the one hand you can touch and see and perceive these with the other senses, but on the other hand it is the case that those abiding according to the same which sounds like the first category of the dialectic, of course, self to self or self according to the same, cannot be grasped in any other way whatsoever except... This is what we're after. As philosophers, we want beauty itself. We want justice itself. We want all the things that always exist and are not composite and don't decay and will always be there. The nightclub Socrates is at, including the self, including reality. So, hey, you want to know the self? We're not going to find it through our senses. You've never seen yourself. So, they cannot be grasped through the senses except by, this is what we want to know, by use of the logos. This is why logos is so important as the mystical tradition. Not the many different variations. The logos is how we grasp them. In no other way. Cannot be grasped in any other way. That's fascinating. So whether you're talking to your friends at the pub or you're having coffee and a chat with your friends, or we're in Discord chatting, sharing where we're at and where we're stuck, or whether you're talking to a guru at an ashram or at a Taoist monastery or at a Buddhist temple, same thing. Where are you at, or where are you stuck with the logos? Because they cannot be grasped in any other way other than using the logos. They might not be aware that they're using the logos, or they might have a kind of logos that says everything is Maya, everything is illusion, or whatever, or just count your breath or something. There's a kind of logos. There is words and reasoning of some kind. They might not be using it well. This is what we're doing. We're learning the game rules so we can play it well. So we can be good and do good, both in this life and the next. Except by using the logos of, we haven't finished yet. Of the understanding. Now, capital U of dianoia, which is what? Not understanding how to fix your car's engine, understanding directed towards being. So using the logos of the understanding, since such entities are formless and not visible. Socrates is laying it all out for us. He ain't pulling his punches. CB says, what you say is altogether true. Okay, CB. That's funny, because does CBs know the truth? Socrates obviously does, because he has knowledge of it and can provide a logos of it. And say, hey, by the way, I'm using dialectical language according to self, according to others. I'm recognizing the difference between adjectives in the physical and nouns in the realm of being. I'm laying it all out through, questions and answers, showing the necessary existence of the self-ousia, and pointing it out that you can only grasp it through the logos of the understanding, of the dianoia. So Socrates knows the truth. We can infer, but CB says, what you say is altogether true. I think that's a little bit funny. Like, what do you know about truth, CBs? I mean, it's good. I mean, as far as he can see, sure. Are you willing then that we set up two kinds of beings so that one kind is visible and the other kind formless? All right. Let's set it up, says CBs. On the one hand, the formless always remain according to the same, whereas on the other hand, the visible never remain according to the same. Okay? Formless remains. That sounds like a Metallica song. So talking about making songs. This is a good one. I should be taking notes. But the formless remains. Where's my guitar? No, don't get distracted. The visible never remains according to the same. Let us set this up also. Come along then. Play. One part of ourselves is in the body. The other part is the soul. One part of ourselves is the body. The other part is the soul. CB says, sure, yep, none other. To which idea then? Okay, this is important. Often this word is mistranslated in academic circles as idea, because it sounds the same as concept. It's not idea, it's to behold. And of course, you can see it breaks down, because you wouldn't say the body is a concept and the soul is a concept. We're talking about two aspects of ourselves, two parts of ourselves. So that's why the translator gave it not just a capital, but gave it multicolored. Not just color, but multicolored. Hey, to which idea, behold, grasp. We call the word forms like self-beauty, all those things we say is self-ousia, that we can grasp with nous through the logos and dianoia. We grasp them. That's why it's behold. So that's important. So don't accept form as the translation. That's not good enough. Lacks excellence and truth. To which idea then shall we say the body is more alike or more akin? CB says this is clear to everyone that it is more alike and akin to the visible. So body, visible. What about the soul? Is it visible or formless? The soul, it is indeed not visible to human beings, O Socrates. But do we speak of things that are naturally visible to human vision, and of those that are not naturally visible? Or does it seem to apply to any others? Right, okay. Things that are visible, naturally visible to human beings, human vision. CB says, to those visible to human vision. We do speak of those. What then do we say about the soul? Is she visible or invisible? Not visible. Interesting. He went from invisible to not visible. So that's good because Socrates is making a positive statement. He's saying what the soul is. It is invisible. CB's is not at that level where he can make a definitive statement about what the soul is. He can't do a dialectic, the first category of the dialectic. He doesn't know what the soul is. Of course, he doesn't have to know it to do a dialectic. That's the training to get to knowledge. But he recognizes he doesn't know what it is, but he can say what it's not. He hasn't seen a soul, so it's not visible. So that's good of him. Socrates says it is invisible. CB says it's not visible. Accordingly, then, she is formless. Our soul is invisible and formless. Yes. Accordingly, then, soul is more like the formless than the body. These are our comparisons. Two categories here. While on the other hand, the body is more like the visible. Altogether necessary. Again, the word necessary as a way of changing your mind or being convinced. Is it also the case then that we stated the following not long ago? That when the soul, on the one hand, makes use of the body to investigate something, either by seeing or hearing or through some other sense, for this is to investigate something through the perceptions of the body, at that time she is dragging about the body to things. Okay, this is what we saw earlier. Let's go back and find the word dragging. Okay, so we're on page 41. Let's go back to page 17. Page 15 in the text. Here we go. So back early on, Socrates giving his doctrine about what philosophy is, said, hey, have we grasped the selves through the body perceptions, self-justice, self-beauty, self-good, or in one word, the ousia of all the others? Now, having read further, we can see why he can call all of these self-er terms one word, the ousia. He brought them together later on in the argument, in the logos. They are contemplated not through the body, but those who prepare themselves most accurately to accurately understand each self that they investigate. So understanding, this person will approach closest to the intuitive knowledge or the noesis. The person does this most perfectly who approaches towards each being with the self-understanding, the excellence of our understanding, which we're seeing as low-res dialectic, without associating their sight with their understanding, nor dragging any other sense perception, and not one, with their reasoning, but uses understanding that one purifies self by self. Wah! Self by self, we know that expression refers to both the dialectic and the nature of the beings that are incomposite, and tries to track down each of the unalloyed beings. That weird word that we heard earlier, what the heck is unalloyed doing there? What's another word for unalloyed? Not composite, not made out of different materials. It's a single alloy. Self by self. So we purify ourselves through the dianoia, somehow self by self. Now we know that word means means dialectic, and it means the nature of the beings. So now we know we are becoming most like being itself. We are doing the dialectic, self by self, and ourselves becoming most unified. And that is the process, so long as we're not dragging any other sense perception, not one. We will liberate ourselves as far as possible from the eyes and ears, and in a word, the sum of the body, since it troubles the soul and does not enable her to acquire truth and mindfulness, the two things we're after as philosophers. When she is associated with the body, is it not this one who reaches the being? Okay, this is self by self, unalloyed, self-understanding, and not dragging our senses, not one. And let's go back to where we were. This was page 15. And now where we are at page 39. So what he had in his doctrine earlier, he's able to break down with his friend who doesn't quite get the doctrine, because Seebees has these false beliefs about the soul, these fears of death. And hey, most of us have fears of death. We don't know what's going to happen when we die until we play the game. But we're sort of told that there isn't a way of understanding what happens when you die, and there's definitely not a way of experiencing it. Not everybody, but a lot of people. So we can relate to Seebees here, but we're also told to fear death, which is weird, because if we don't know what it is, why do we fear it? Well, because we fear that we will lose the self, the most important thing, and the most primary thing. Perhaps even more primary than self-ousia, the hyparxis of the beings. But anyway, so we're singing a song to dispel ourselves from the fear that we will flitter away to the wind or become worm food or something of that nature. Okay, so soul is more like the things that are invisible and formless, where the body is the kind of being that is visible. And then he says, do we investigate something through the... Okay, here we go. We stated the following not long ago. Oh yeah, we did state... Yeah, okay. We did state it not long ago, and we just reread it. That when the soul, on the one hand, makes use of the body to investigate something, either by seeing or hearing, or some other sense, for this is to investigate something through the perceptions of the body... Boo. She is dragged about by the body to things that are never abiding according to the same, and so wanders about and is confused and dizzy, just as self would drunk, insofar as self comes in contact with those kinds of things. Right. Our fears and our illusion. What does he say? Our illusions. Let's go back to page 18. What does the body do when it drags the soul around? If there's a straight path with no deviations to guide us along the logos, the dialectic or the dianoia, the body is a corrupting agent. She contaminates us. we never sufficiently attain what we really desire. This is the truth because the body keeps us busy in numberless ways through its sustenance, its need for sustenance, and any disease that befalls it. It will impede our chase for being in reality. The body fills us with many passions and desires and fears and all sorts of illusions and foolishness. And so, as the saying goes, the truth in reality, not any phronesis of any kind arises for us because of the body. For the body and its desires gives us nothing other than war, bam, civil discord, bam, and battles. For all wars arise because of the acquisition of possessions and for the sake of the body. And we are compelled to acquire riches because we're enslaved by its care. Because through and out of this we have no leisure for philosophy. Worst of all, when we do have some rest from the body and we turn to some study, everywhere in our search, the body falls in again, presents itself in a clamor and pouring in, drives us out of our mind so that we are not enabled by self to behold the truth. Because if we want to enter into a certain pure state, we must be liberated from the body because we want to behold the self-realities with the self-soul. And that time, the thing that we truly claim to be lovers of, phronesis, only happens when we're dead, as the Logos points out, not while we're alive. For it is not possible to have the noesis, the intuitive knowing, in a pure way with the body. Meaning we either can't have it or we can only have it from when we're dead. Because at that time, the soul will be self by self. Is that expression again? Separate from the body. But while we live, we will be closest to knowing when we neither associate nor commune with the body as much as possible. More than is necessary. Only eat as many sandwiches as you need. Purify yourself from the body until the divine self should liberate us. Let us into the club. And thus being purified, and on the other hand, having been liberated from the phronesis of the body, whatever the phronesis is, some sort of attention or focus directed to the body, we shall be with such a kind as ourselves, and know that which is pure by being pure ourselves. That is the doctrine that we repeat to each other if we're right lovers of learning.
Wow.
So all the way back then, he's pointed, this is what happens. This is the cause of our problems. Hey, world leaders, read the Phaedo. So here, we're dragged about by the body, and we're never abiding according to the same. So we are confused and dizzy as if we were drunk. Why would we fear reality if not that others have made us fear it by the veritable lie? Absolutely. So the Furia in the chat is calling out the section that we're reading in a read along that I'm involved with Mindy on YouTube called All About Platonism. And we point out, we read earlier in book 2, I think, of the Republic, 2 or 3. The thing that is to be most feared in the Republic is the veritable lie, which is a fundamental lie about what is fundamentally true about reality, self and reality. The good would never have and never, and that without harm do no evil. That without evil is good. Of course, the word is bad in the Greek. They don't have an idea of evil. But yeah, we want to separate ourselves from the pathologos version, which has a lot of qualities of the good version, still has the dialectic, still has some allegiance to the truth, only it's the shadow. Yes, right. So the veritable lie is to believe that God would, or the God is not good and would harm someone. It's not simple. He would deceive us. Yeah, it's not good, it's not simple, and it's not true. So don't ever believe that. Thumbs up. That's the pathologos. So So that's just a reference to the Republic. But here he's saying, hey, if you are still connected to your body, you are confused and dizzy. So the body wants us to investigate things that are perceptions of the body. So if you're dragged around the body, what are you going to talk about over coffee with your friends? Tom Cruise. Who won the Formula One race the other day? Donald Trump. Oh, I'm a bit guilty of that. Right? And if you do that, if you trace things that you see with your physical senses, or your body seeks and desires or fears or has illusions of, then you'll be drunk. That body will make the soul drunk and wandering around, which is interesting because early in Socrates' life, when he first learned about the dialectic, when he was new to philosophy, when he was 19, Socrates said, hey, look, he gives props to Socrates. Where is it? Here. So, this is a conversation that Parmenides had with Socrates when he was 19. He said this. Socrates said, hey, what then, O Parmenides, is the way of the exercise of philosophy that can lead us to these beings? This is young Socrates. Parmenides says, hey, the way is just that you heard Zeno practicing, except that I was quite pleased with this that you said to him, because you would not allow him to look upon the wandering that exists among the objects of sight, and the wandering that exists in relation to them, but to consider according to those one can grasp, especially by the logos. Whoops. And in this way, one would be led to see the ideas. So interesting, hey? He said, hey, look, I see something good in you, Socrates, that I'm pleased with. You wouldn't allow Zeno to get interested in things of the senses themselves, the objects of sight, and in relation. So these two categories that we've been talking about, what can you say about self itself? And in relation to the others, those are the two categories of the first two categories of the dialectic: self itself and self in relation to others. So this section here, does the body, humans, horses, clothes, and things that have adjectives equal, adjectives beautiful, do they exist according to the same? According to self or according to each other? According to self is the first category. According to other is the second. He's using them here to refer to being, because he says they don't. These physical things don't exist according to self or according to each other, the others. He's referring to being. Whereas Parmenides said, hey, you didn't let Zeno get interested in physical things themselves or in relation to others physically. So you can have according to yourself and according to others. There are two kinds of things that exist: things and relationships, things themselves and the things that exist in relation to others. That's it. And he's saying, hey, I like that you didn't let Zeno get wrapped up in physical things. You didn't ask him what he thought of Tom Cruise or who won the sport game. You wanted him to talk about the things themselves and in relation to other beings. And here we're saying, where are we? A bit further down. Here we're saying, according to, you're dragged about the body and never according to the same. And that makes you wander about and as though you're drunk. In the chat, I know that drunk feeling. If a person smells good enough, like a drug, And after you're like, what the hell? No logos to wonder about. Right, yes. Our physical senses can draw us into objects and relations. What do you think about Tom Cruise and relations? Do you think he's hot or not? Gossip, physical world stuff. And he's saying, hey, that makes you drunk. The whole reason you're interested in Tom Cruise anyway is because you think there's beauty there, or excellence there, or truth there. But you're drunk. It's not the real thing. Take off your beer goggles. You won't find that which you'd actually desire. Beauty itself. You'll just see examples or adjectives. So, if you're not purified from the perceptions of your body, you're being dragged around by the body. So who's in charge? The soul or the body? If you live your life according to the senses and through the senses of the body. Hey, no wonder we're in problems. Drunk? No, you're drunk. No, I'm not drunk, you're drunk. No wonder we have problems. How many people are not living according to the sense that isn't in the body? No wonder that list we war, civil discord, battles. That's globally. That's the nature of humanity right now. Politically, in our justice system, in our schools, even capitalism. That's a big, giant battle that's turning the whole world to crap. Being dragged around by the body to find riches, so we can provide sustenance for our body. But we're drunk, says Socrates. Okay? Self wanders about and is confused and dizzy. Yeah, no joke. That's their world. And ourselves. Where we're at, where we're stuck. So we could say, hey, where are you at and where are you drunk? Where are you confused and dizzy as though you're drunk? By all means. Whereas on the... Yes, right. So like even the need for food can distract you from this contemplation. But Socrates in the symposium stood under a tree for like 3 days or something. He was able to, in his army days, he was barefoot. Right, the bad food you eat when you're drunk. Exactly. The same with the body and the passions. Ah, nice. Right, so drunk is to bad food as passions is to the body. I don't know, there's a metaphor in there somewhere. Socrates was able to stand in the same spot for a long time. At the start of the symposium, he stood on somebody's front porch, the next door neighbor, and everybody knew enough about Socrates to realize, oh, you just leave him. He's no harm to anyone. So imagine like opening your front door and seeing Socrates standing there as like completely still. And when he went into the party, they knew, it's like, hey, what wisdom did you get? And sit next to me, because I want the wisdom to fall onto me as a joke. But they recognize that this wisdom state is separate from the body. Alcibiades came in and thought, oh, he was pretending to be drunk, by the way, maybe. And thought, oh, well, Socrates had good endurance. No, you know he wasn't doing it out of physical endurance. He wasn't there. He wasn't in his body. And also when he was in his body in his war campaigns, he wore a single robe, I think, a single cloak and bare feet, even through the snow. Of course, there are people who do various kinds of meditation who can do that now. So there is an ability to separate from the body that's demonstrated by Socrates, but we're defining it here. Whereas on the other hand, says Socrates, when she truly investigates self according to self, there's our expression again, she passes into that realm. Wow, that's something new. That is pure and eternal and deathless and remains and abides in the same way. Okay, let's highlight all that. Pure. Eternal. deathless, abides, remains in the same way, and being always akin with self. That's a big one. Let's get that yellow. She also becomes that whenever she arises into self according to self and goes out. Self both ceases from your wandering and always remains according to the same in the same way about those beings, insofar as she remains in contact with such beings. And this experience or state of self is called phronesis. We've had this question for ages. Okay, let's break it down. This is a big question we've been carrying. What the heck is phronesis? If we're lovers of truth and phronesis, we've been puzzling on this for a long, long time. So when you do this investigation, self according to self, you pass into that realm. That sounds like that being led into the club. The self, the divine self lets you in, or you've purified yourself sufficiently into that pure. Okay, yep, we have to be pure because it's only lawful that the pure reach the pure. Eternal. There's the immortality of the soul aspect. Deathless. And abiding in the same way. There's our incomposite, not changing. And by being always akin with self. So this is an extra clue. If you're at that stage of being, are you akin with your object? Like if you're studying self-justice, do you become akin with justice? Or are all of those beings somehow akin or like the self? Is there a higher level even to being called self that the beings are akin to? That's a question. That goes into our question sack. She also becomes that whenever she arises into self. So there's a kind of self that we can return into, that we arise from the body into, according to self. So there's the self according to self. And goes out. Self both ceases from wandering. So there's our problems. The self dragging us around, wandering about. There's the keyword wandering. Let's give it a different color. Wandering. So there are problems. The body and its illusions and foolishness and desires and diseases and attraction to possessions and honors and clothes and things of that nature. That's the cause of all war and battling and suffering. That's our wandering. That's our confused and dizzy state of being. You can cease from those problems, cease from that wandering, and always remain according to the same in the same way. You are the same and the same with the same about those beings, insofar as she remains in contact. You contact it. You purify yourself, you become like it, and then you contact it, and then you become the same as it. And that makes sense because to experience something in the physical senses, you have the thing, the pen, you have the organ, and then you have the act of sensing. You need a medium of light to perceive it. You need an observer behind the eyes, in a sense. So you need all these different things to see a physical thing. But if there's not the physical, if you're not in your body, if you don't have these sense organs, how do you contact it? How do you know being? How do you know the self? He is saying you contact it and you become the same as it. So our way of returning home is through likeness. We become pure to be like the pure. We separate from the body to be like the soul. We therefore contact the beings which we are the same as. So there's our self-terms of likeness and sameness. So one of the questions are, hang on a second, I can see how pure being or self-ousia is beautiful and just and good. That makes sense. But those other class of self-terms that we got from the Parmenides, like and unlike, same and different, how can you say it's the same? What the hell does that mean? How is this the paradigm or ultimate for the idea of same? I get it for beauty. I get it for goodness and justice, but same and like? How is it likeness itself? Well, this might give us some clues, because it's through likeness to the purity that we perfect itself, and we become like self in the experience. So even being is most like the highest thing, and by contacting with being, that state of knowledge of the beings, we are the same in the same way. We are same by same. All the way through, he's saying, by the same, according to the same, according to the same. So what the heck is this same we're the according to? It might be that being itself is the same. Not a same thing, and that these pens are the same as each other. No, it's the same. So this whole being according to same means according to being. So in that way, the self-term that we got of same and likeness from the Parmenides, we can see how it's an aspect or attribute of self-ousia, as it's easier to see for beauty and stuff. So that's pretty cool. It's through likeness we become like that which is like self, which makes us pure and deathless, but it also means we abide in the same way. That's the arising to self according to self. It ceases from our drunken wandering and problems, and you will always remain same according to same in the same way about those beings insofar as she remains in contact. So that's interesting. For as far as you remain in contact, you're always there. So if this thing is pure and eternal and deathless, for as long as you remain in contact, you are always remaining. Which is a kind of a weird way of thinking about it. So long as you stay purified from your body, you will always be there. But if you're not contact, you're no longer always there. But once you're there, you're always there. That might be the weird sense of timelessness. Like people who've had drug trips and things, they talk about, I was there for a lifetime, or I was there for eternity. But now I'm not. Now I'm back in my body. Well, yeah, you will, so long as you remain in contact with the beings, your wandering doesn't draw you down, you will be there always. Which is a weird way of thinking about it. But if it's outside of time, it has to be in this way, which is wild. What do you say, Owen?
Wow.
Owen's whole family says.
Wow.
And that experience or state of self is called phronesis. That state of remaining in contact with the beings and always remaining ceased from your problems is phronesis. So we have more to add to our mystery of what the heck phronesis is. It is a kind of state of self. And it's while you remain in contact with the beings. And once you're there, you're always there, for as long as you remain in contact. So let's nail down this, because the self is the big word, of course. That's the ultimate. That's our ultimate goal. That's the most primary. It's the most immediate. It's the most profound. But it's always there. This is the what's the word? Not paradox. This is the brilliance and the simplicity and the profound puzzle of our spiritual quest to return home. It's always there. the most fundamental thing. In your ups and downs, in whatever you think, in whatever you feel, there's always a self there feeling it and thinking it. So it's the most immediate and the most personal and the most intimate, but it's also the loftiest and the most profound and the end of our task. The first and final cause is called. So that's what self is. That's what we're looking for, the word self here. That's why it stands out to us. Let's give it purple. Self-mindfulness. Phronesis is the word we're using. Self-phronesis. Like if a demon possesses you and you're in contact with it. All the same both ways. Interesting. From the chat. So, we want to know what phronesis is because Socrates has been saying, hey, if you're a true philosopher, you seek two things. Truth, which seems to be what we were defining, the incomposite, the formless that always remains the same. Abiding same by same can only be grasped using the logos of the understanding, the dianoia. That has a self-ousia. We get there, we we get there through our questions and answers of the dialectic. That's truth. The other thing we're after is phronesis, which seems to be a kind of state of self when we remain in contact with self-ousia. Wow.
Wow.
Yes, we would not overlook it, and it's more divine, and it doesn't lose its power for as long as we remain in contact. So there might be this idea of the virtues relating to the logos of being, like temperance isn't chasing a body desire, it's chasing what wisdom desires, and wisdom seeks the logos through dianoia about being. Maybe the initiation or the upgrade that you trade in those virtues for, we saw that wisdom becomes self-phronesis. So here we have self-phronesis. So maybe if we reach there through the logos, maybe that's the upgrade. Let's go back to the upgrade, the initiation. See it in the text. Okay. So there's a certain rite of initiation. That's the true mystic rite. Because the many are the staff bearers, but only few are the true mystics. Those are those who practice philosophy correctly. And we get there through being purified and perfected, becoming pure, which is separating from our body, of course, ceasing our drunken wanderings and the battles and fights that happen as a result of being sensing through your body. If you die, you will reach the afterlife in the mud, because you're uninitiated and unaccomplished. So what is the initiation? Rite of initiation. Here we go. Okay. The right exchange for the virtues isn't... Right. Nice metaphor. Sounds like something like Sharingan eyes from Naruto. Interesting. Could be. So it's not being mastering certain pleasures in order to be mastered by other pleasures. That's not the right exchange for our virtues. Exchanging pleasures for pleasures, pains for pains, fears for fears. The only currency that you exchange your virtues that you've been practicing, that we've been doing together in our community, on our YouTube channel, in our Discord, with our songwriting, with our sharing of our songs, all of that thing that we've been using, our practice, practicing our virtues, applied to the logos of dianoia and dialectic, you exchange it for mindfulness. All that work, all that currency, you trade it for mindfulness. That's the only valid currency. Okay, and what is it? You start with being and vitality and sound-mindedness and justice. Okay, what are the four virtues? Wisdom, which he's saying you can give it another word, being. Courage, give it another word, vitality, virility. Sound-mindedness, keep the same word. Justice, keep the same word. These are the four virtues. They are true virtues when united with phronesis. Whether you have pleasures or fears or whatever else is added or subtracted, whatever you go through, the virtue, it's a very different, is that virtue which is exchanged for one another without mindfulness. That becomes vice. By being that which is a certain outline of a shadow and possesses neither soundness of truth and is fit for slaves. That's the vice. But the truth is truly a purification from those things, directing any of the parts of your soul, your desiring part, your seeking part, your thinking part, or as a whole, your doing part. All of the vices, when it's not logos, dianoia, dialectic applied to being. So that's the shadow, desiring our vices, seeking to do things with courage and vitality that is not the logos, using something other than the logos to direct your planning and functioning in the world in that way. Those are the 4 virtues applied to vice. But the rite of initiation turns those 4 virtues into what? Temperance. Or sound-mindedness, the same. It doesn't change. Justice doesn't change. Courage, which was called virility, doesn't change. The virtue that applies to being, wisdom, changes. There's a different approach to being where wisdom, which was a kind of approach to being, we can hypothesize it's through the logos we approach being, because it's the logos that we desire with sound-mindedness. It's the logos that we hold on to with our virility and courage. It's the logos that we do at all times with our justice. So therefore, it would follow that wisdom could be the logos applied to being. We have to go into the Republic to make sure. Maybe we'll do that next time. But those 4 virtues are traded in with a currency to become, you still desire the logos of being with temperance. That doesn't change. You still use the logos of being in the dialectic at all times. So that doesn't change with justice at all times. You still hold on to the logos of being at all times, no matter what happens. Still courage. You still have that virility or vitality of courage. Balloons. But wisdom changes from wisdom to self-phronesis. That's the rite of initiation. So, that was a mystery. What the heck does that mean? Well, that was page, I think, 19. Let's jump ahead to so that's the thing, right? So here's how he showed the initiation. These were the clues he gave us. We started with the 4 virtues. Where are they? Up more. No? We started with the 4 virtues. Justice, wisdom, courage, sound-mindedness over here. But then he said, hang on a second, let's talk about the shadow version, the vices. Here are the vice versions, the shadow. The shadow of sound-mindedness is to be master some pleasures, to be mastered by others. Master your drinking problem to be a good gambler, that kind of thing. Courage is you still face death, but you're motivated by fear. It's not because you understand death. When did you start hearing the letters in your head? What do you mean? So, a wisdom, a clarity of sight, caring for yourself, seeing, planning, and understanding, but directed towards the care of your individual body, like a tyrant. So we got from the text a vice version, the shadow. And so we had to look at that and say, what are they all missing? And they're missing logos. Sound-mindedness. You don't desire other pleasures, you desire the logos. The logos of what? The logos or understanding directed towards being as your focus. Courage. You face death, but you're afraid of death. What do you lack? The logos of death. What's death? The state of being. The realm of being, ousia. So you lack the logos of being and understanding of being. Wisdom. You've got a certain level of understanding, but is it the logos? No. Are you using your clarity of sight and seeing and planning to reach being? No. So all of the vices versions lack fundamentally two things, logos or understanding directed to being. So we deduced that from the puzzles in the text. We went back into our rite of initiation and say, okay, what's the initiation that he said, the mystical initiation? Well, sound-mindedness, courage, wisdom, and justice becomes sound-mindedness, justice, and he changed these two words for being and vitality or virality. What does that mean? Well, being and vitality are two aspects of this triad we had with us. We've been using all the way along. Being, power or vitality, and activity. So he's saying, hey, look, that triad you had of the virtues maps to the triad of being, power, and activity. That's why we have skill trees, because we have a whole bunch of triads in our triad skill tree. Let's use another one. The soul. Planning, outward moving, inward desiring. These are the three aspects of our soul. We could map that. Is planning something focused on being? Is outward moving something that needs power and vitality? Is inward desiring that which motivates our activity? Maybe. What about sound-mindedness? Is that a kind of activity of our sound-mindedness, our inward desiring, our desires? Yep. Courage. Do we need some sort of outward moving thing to be motivated by courage? Does courage motivate how we act in the world? Yeah. Wisdom. Do we use wisdom to plan? So what we do is whatever triad you pull out, and you might have a whole bunch in your inventory or your skill tree, you can rub them together because that's the logos. They overlap, which means you can pull out one branch of the skill tree, rub it up against another one, and it will spark an insight. You'll gain more about it. Socrates is saying, hey, I'm using that now. I'm doing that. I'm jumping like a double jump in Mario. I'm jumping from the 4 virtues to this triad here, so I can jump from there to there to there, make a double jump. Why? Because it gives us some work to do. So sound-mindedness stays at sound-mindedness. Courage he calls vitality, but that doesn't change. Justice he calls justice, and that doesn't change. But wisdom he calls being. These are the two he changes, but they're interchangeable because they're triads that fit. And wisdom changes to being, and that changes to phronesis in the initiation. So something in the initiation changes these to these. Of course, even after the initiation, courage is the same, so you can still call it vitality. You can still call sound-mindedness the activity you go through, what you desire. Justice doesn't change. But wisdom And we looked at the vices to say, hey, what's all the virtues need that makes it not vice, fit for slaves, causes our wandering and our illusions and our fears and our problems and our fighting. If any of those lack the logos directed to being, you are acting unjustly. You are feeding your injustice. You are feeding your vices. It's not lacking the virtues. It's not being ignorant. It's having a lot of the qualities directed towards your vices. If they are directed towards anything other than logos of being. So, how can we use that to understand the initiation? Well, if these become these, then wisdom, which is using the logos of being for our planning. So these are the parts of the soul on this planning, outward desiring. You want to outward moving. This is the soul triad. Actually, let's write it down properly. Do we have it somewhere? No, let's write it here. So let's write down the soul triad. Soul. There's a part of your soul that plans. The planning part of your soul. It's not going to fit. There's an outward moving part of your soul. There's a reason why you tuned into this podcast. There's an inward desiring. You want to have fish and chips. And there's a planning. You have to plan what you want to eat, what you want to have with your fish and chips, or how to get the fish and chips. You have to plan what you want to do with your activities. So these are the three aspects of the soul. Now, why do we care? Well, the more triads, the better. It helps us figure out, solve problems. This is a problem-solving aspect of being a philosopher. Interesting. When we behold, we are holding the concept of the word itself. Right, so maybe it's a transition from the logos to the being. Let's have a look. So, sound-mindedness. Yeah. If you reach being, you can still desire being. And the logos of being, logos and being. Courage, you still hold on to the logos of being. Justice, you still use the logos of being through the dialectic. But wisdom, what you use for planning, which is the logos directed towards being, in that initiation, which Socrates is now saying, you become the same as being. What you use for your planning might not be wisdom anymore, might not be the logos applied to being anymore. For as long as you remain in contact with being, you are the same as being. So therefore, it's not wisdom you use for your planning. It's sameness. You are the model. You are being. So long as you are in contact with it. That might be the phronesis that is the upgrade of wisdom. As we learn, we use the logos that we learn as we're learning with this channel and in these texts. We use our learning of the logos for our planning. We plan to read the text. We plan a way of solving the puzzles in the text. We plan a way of using these triads over each other. We plan how to direct our day. We could be doing other things. But we're directing our planning towards the logos of being. That's what makes us wise. Or rather, it's the virtue we put into ourselves through practice and habit of doing this. We are practicing the virtue of wisdom. But Socrates is saying, hey, look, there will be a point where you can cease from your wandering, made pure, By separating your soul from the body, you're no longer being dragged around the body. So this virtue of wisdom, planning based on the logos of being that we get from the Phaedo in our groups here, you are sufficiently purified from in that activity, and you become the pure, and you abide in the same way as the pure, eternal, and deathless. You will be with being and akin to the self. Self according to self. You have ceased from your wandering. You will always remain according to the same, in the same way, so long as you remain in contact with that. Therefore, that wisdom that you've been using to plan your life, spend your activities looking at the logos applied to being in this text, desire it, temperance, hold on to it as your motivation, courage, use it in your life to plan wisdom. That's the virtue of wisdom. Upgrades in this experience when you become that, when it's worked, when it's finished, when it's completed, you've been sufficiently purified, then that state of being that yourself is in upgrades from wisdom, the virtue, to phronesis. That's the rite of initiation. When this purification through the logos in the dialectic that we call dianoia finishes, you are separated from your body. The body is no longer dragging you around. You're no longer dizzy and confused and drunk. You no longer have the troubles, the battles, the wars that follow. You're no longer interested in shoes and clothes and Bugattis. You are now pure and eternal and deathless in the same way that you've been using the virtues to purify yourself to reach. You have become like it sufficiently that you become the same as it. And so long as you remain in contact, you don't have to use the virtue of wisdom, the virtue of using the logos about being to use your planning. You can just use phronesis because you are the ultimate. You are the self-usia. You have united. Use that for your planning. Use that for your paradigm and everything you do. Use your own state of self as your planning and guide and paradigm in your creation, your art. And I suspect that's why Socrates is able to do his dialectics so well. He's not remembering his logos from his dialectics and using his mythology to help remember it. He is there. He's in it. He's in that state of self called phronesis. He has been initiated. And that makes sense because he said only when you've been, here we go. Only when you've been sufficiently purified and perfected, when you reach the afterlife, Hades, you will be happy. You will be, you will trust that you will reach good masters and good friends because you have been initiated and accomplished your purpose. Which means if he's happy about dying, he has been initiated. And he recognizes he's accomplished his purpose. And if the initiation, which is the true mysticism, this is true spirituality, by the way. Wow, that's cool to know. And requires a kind of initiation. And he says he's done it. That's why he's not worried about being in the mud when he dies. That means he has been initiated. And the initiation is changing wisdom to phronesis. So we seek truth as philosophers. But if you've also done your work at the virtues, you're using it, then when you reach that truth, it upgrades all the virtues. So you are the thing you desire. You are the thing you hold on to, courage. So your courage will be effortless. You don't have to not fear death because the logos tells you all these things about the nature of being. You don't have to not fear death because you've got this logos in your back pocket and you can refer to that. That's what it means to have the virtue of courage. You are it. You know it. So you're not afraid of it because you are in it. So the virtue of courage of practice upgrades to the true virtue. It's an effortless courage. People who have near-death experience say, I don't fear death anymore because I had a near-death experience and I know what it's like. That's a common sort of a thing from people who have had these experiences. So that would be the true virtue of courage. It's not an effort. We have to practice sound-mindedness, desiring the logos of being until we're there. But once we're there, if it's ultimate beauty, as the logos has been explaining to us, then we wouldn't have to kind of discipline ourselves to desire it and have the virtue of temperance instead of gambling or alcoholism or whatever our other desires are, the vices. if you recognize it and experience it as pure beauty, of course you're going to desire it above everything else. Because you're there. You've fallen in love with beautiful. It's the most beautiful thing. So that's the upgrade. You still have the true virtue of temperance, the true virtue of courage. Easy to hold on to the truth if you're there. And you don't have to use the logos of being and wisdom for your planning. You can use what you're directly looking at, or being, or the same as. And I suspect Socrates is using that in his dialectic, so that would be the true virtue of justice. Because all the way through his dialectic, he has been using the dialectic to guide his argument, his reasoning. But he's also been using these aspects of being to judge the argument. Was it sufficiently beautiful? Was it sufficiently necessity? Well, it'd be easy to judge whether or not something's beautiful if you're looking at it. So this might be what he means by this, phronesis, the state of self called phronesis, when you remain in contact with the beings. So the idea of justice, if that's doing the dialectic at all times. Right. You're not fearing death because you know it, because you are it. Not know it through the logos, which you have to start with. You have to start with trusting the logos, and then you learn it yourself through the dialectic. Now you have the understanding, but it's still a hypothesis. It's the best kind of hypothesis. It's understanding. You realize a necessity and you recognize a beauty in the reasoning to show why it has to be true. But then you upgrade into directly experiencing it, the contemplation of that which you've been perfecting yourself to see. Concentration, meditation, contemplation. And then once you have it, you experience what we call nous, the nous of being, and all of the beings, whether it's beauty or justice or goodness or even same or even likeness, they all culminate in the same hyparxis experience of pure being, meaning it's not logos that you seek, that you follow, that you desire, that you use. It's your own self. You are the paradigm now, because you are always akin with self, this like self, the same as self, so long as you remain in contact with it. And this state of self is called mindfulness. And CB says, what you say is altogether elegantly said and true. Now, I want to find what this word elegantly means, because I have a suspicion it might be beautiful, because we've been using beautiful already as our metric to determine what makes something true in the dialectic. So let's check it out. Translate it into Greek from our mysterious ancient text. Now we paste it to hear what it sounds like.
Kalios.
Kalios. What does Kalios mean? Beautiful. It means beautiful. So yeah, beautiful. So he is using beauty to judge here. Kalios.
Kalios.
Beautiful. So, adding a kind of confirmation to our hypothesis that the ousias, the self-terms, are not only what we seek and what we remind everybody of, even sticks, but it's also what we use as our metric to change our mind. So the three questions we had: is the soul immortal? Yeah, not only is it immortal, it's the self-beings, it's self-ousia. How do we communicate that, the dialectic, and what changes our mind? Well, it looks like an understanding or an apprehension of the self-beings. Because he says, hey, it was beautiful and therefore true. Earlier he said it's not only beautiful, there's a logos necessity to it. So whether we like it or not only do we seek it, we also use it. Meaning, the more familiar we are with it in this experience of contacting with it, we know the metric and the paradigm that we should be using to judge arguments and change our minds. And we're doing it anyway. As philosophers, what are we doing? We're just learning the rules of the game so we can play it well. Right? If everything seeks the beings, why not learn how to do it? This. If everything even sticks, have a purpose to remind ourselves to do that, then why not learn the dialectic to remind ourselves and our friends? That's how we would remind ourselves the best. And not only that, while we're being reminded, or while we're returning to that which we actually desire, we have to use something as a metric to change our mind, to focus us, to convince us sufficiently, to unite our understanding sufficiently, to prepare ourselves for the experience. And what we're using is the experience itself. Whether we like it or not, we're using it to think. The argument has to be elegant or beautiful, self-beauty. It has to be self-necessity, some sort of justice or necessity to it. And we have to recognize the reasoning. The reasoning has to unfold step by step in a rational manner. That's the self-logos. And the self-soul, the self-logos, and all of the self-beings, including self-beauty, are united in that hypothesis of self according to self, the unalloyed, pure, eternal, deathless, always remaining being, self-ousia. So that's what changes our mind. We seek it, we guide others to it, and we use it in our thinking. So we could even map that onto our triad. We talk about the self-triad. Here we go. Our self-triad, one self, self-logos, and self-truth. We talk about the pathologos being rejection or an inadequate version of that. You can't think. Your goal is no good, and your nature is no good. Your mind is no good. But here we're saying, hey, everything seeks as its goal the self, or to be to connect with self. All of our thinking follows the logos, and our judgments uses self-being. So our thinking uses being. Logos has a pure existence in being. Beauty has a pure existence in being. That's what we use in our thinking. We seek to unite with self-being in this experience that we call truth. And our purpose, once we get there, our functioning of it, once we've made it our own, is to help others, to remind others. Even sticks are there to remind us of the self-equal. So if we have both of these together, we have the logos and dialectic, which uses being and truth, not just as an understanding, but as a direct experience of self-phronesis. We can function with it. Justice. So that helps us, like switching cultures. I think Socratic culture would be the best. Right. So we're creating a way of being a culture. Like sports teams have a culture, towns have a culture, countries have a culture. We have a culture. And we are making the claim it's the best. And we are showing what we need to understand why it's the best, and to verify your own understanding through that experience and become best yourself. And this seeking the best and functioning the best might be an aspect of phronesis, because you wouldn't have gone through this if you weren't seeking excellence, if you weren't a philosopher desiring the truth and seeking a self-state of excellence that we're calling mindfulness, phronesis. So before we end it today, let's nail down this word here. It is a certain state, experience, or passion of self called mindfulness. I like the word state, but let's nail down what the word is in Greek.
Pathima.
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 Pathima. What does pathima mean? Suffering or misfortune, that which befalls someone. Okay, that's a joke. That's not what it is. The emotional condition is a certain self-condition or certain emotion. Yeah, state seems to fit. Property. The passion of the Christ, that which befalls one. Yeah, emotional condition, the affection. Right, so the ancient Greek, the suffering, the ancient English word suffering means that which you experience. So it's not always negative back in the Old English, but here it's the condition. So we reach that condition that we seek, which is the true virtue, which is the divine virtue, which is the not losing its power virtue, which is that kind of learning that if we have, we can take with us to the nightclub beyond our cycles of reincarnation. Having completed our work here, that state arises from remaining in contact with the beings. And we judge this argument to be beautifully said and therefore true. That was a lot of fun. We did a lot of work today. We did a lot of reading. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for sharing in the chat. We have a Discord now. You can join that and share your thinking and insights and so on. Yeah, a lot of fun. A lot of work. I hope we are more puzzled about this initiation, about what phronesis is, about what being is. I hope we got a lot of questions. And I'm going to look a little bit ahead, see what happens next, because that sounded like a nice way of ending the text. Why didn't he end the text there? Oh, he goes on to say, what is the soul more akin to and alike? Anyway, let's find that out next time. It's been a great stream. Oh, you've been using it in the chat. That's great. Using it, the virtue of wisdom or maybe justice. Thank you for joining me. Yeah, subscribe, like on YouTube, join the Discord if you like. You can find a copy of the text. And I hope you're puzzled. I hope you got something to think about. I hope you've got some sort of question about this purification and phronesis and stuff. And if you have, share them with us, share them with everybody, share them with your friends. And I hope to see you next time. Thanks again.